arithmetic skills. If you have those core algebra and arithmetic skills, you will be in good shape and you will be able to handle almost anything that you see. You might not be as efficient if you knew as you would be if you knew some other things as well. But algebra and arithmetic, those are the big two skills, both on the GRE and the Gmat when it comes to mathematics. Okay. So that's my quick intro into what you want to look at as you go through the test. So what I want to do now, I want to take a look at some specific questions, but I want to ask a question of all of you so that I can sort of tailor this to what the group's interested in. So here's my question. Are you more concerned about the verbal portion of the GRE and the Gmat, or are you more concerned about the mathematics portion of the GRE and the Gmat? I'll show you questions from both, but I want to know where to focus. So just if you could just put that into the chat, just let me know, and I'm going to tailor this a bit to you guys as much as I can. Seems like math is, it seems like math is taking the lead. There's a few verbal, but it seems like math is what everybody wants to look at. Great. Okay, we'll look at math. Well, I'm still going to show you a few verbal questions, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time on math just because there are quite a few more requests for math in there. So let's do that. Let's do that. I'm going to skip past those questions for now, and I'm going to come to this one. So this question up on your screen at the moment, question number 4, as we have it labeled. This is a GRE question. This I lifted straight from a GRE exam. However, you could just as easily see it on a Gmat. Right. So this is technically a GRE question, but you can see this on the Gmat. It's the same type of question. So let's look at this one. I want to break this down for you. I'm going to show you some tricks, what I was talking about a second ago with how the test wants you to think strategically. So this is the ratio of the number of chips in stack S to the number in stack T is 3:2. So we have this 3:2 ratio here. If 3 chips are added to stack S and the same number are subtracted from stack T, the ratio is then going to change to 2:1. What is the total number of chips in both stacks? Now, I'm sure many of you know how to do this mathematically. I'm sure many of you know how to crunch through this and just get yourself to the right answer. But on test day, you don't have time to do everything by the book. You don't have time to do everything out like you would in school. So instead, I want to show you a sneaky way to do this. The right answer, whatever it is, must be divisible by 5. The right answer, whatever it is going to have to be divisible by 5. Let's talk about how I know that. I know that because I've gone from a 3 down to a 2. I've gone from a 3 down to a 2. Right? So the right answer is going to have to be divisible by 5. Additionally, the right answer is going to have to be divisible by 3 because I've gone from 2 down to 1. I've gone from a 2 down to a 1. So my answer, whatever it's going to be, is going to be divisible by both a 5 and a 3. So what you can do is you can go to the answer choices and see which answer choices result in that. If you're interested, this is how you might work out the question mathematically. This is how you might do the question out if you were interested in doing it out. But the right answer, so right away we know it's going to have to be divisible by both a 5 and a 3. 30 is divisible by both 5 and 3, so it could stay. 40 is not divisible by 3. You can get rid of that. 45. Now, is 45 divisible by both a 5 and a 3? Well, yes, it is. It is. It certainly is. So 45 can stay. All right. Well, 48 is not divisible by 5, so it can go. And then 50 is divisible by 5, certainly, but not by 3, so it can go. And now you are down to 2 choices. Now you'd have to decide between 30 and 45. Good news. Even if you don't know how to break that tie, and if you had to make a guess, you have a 50-50 chance of guessing. Pretty good. You now have a 50-50 chance of guessing. You could guess 30, you could guess 45. And that's a lot better than the 20% chance where if you were just taking a guess at the beginning. So recognizing that the 3 and the 2 add to 5, the 2 and the 1 add to 3 must be divisible by 5 and 3. So that's how you can get it down to 2 answer choices. From there, you can take your 30 or your 45 and test it out and see if it'll work. And what you'll realize is it's going to have to be your, what's going on there? It has to be your 45. And so that would be your answer. So narrow it down quickly. And if you don't understand all the background math that goes into this, that's fine. I'm not trying to teach you all every bit of math that you need. In a Kaplan class, we would spend, how long would we spend? We'd spend upwards of 15, 20 hours on that. So I don't really have 15, 20 hours to give you all the background math. But what I'm trying to show you is there's little tricks like this, must be divisible by 5, must be divisible by 3, that dramatically narrow the field. That's what I'm trying to show you. Okay, so there's one example. Let's carry on here. Let's take a look at this question. The question that you see on your screen right now, this monstrosity is something unique to the Gmat. This is unique to the Gmat. This is called a data sufficiency question. On the Gmat, this is one of those question types that a lot of people are concerned about. For example, if you go on to forums, if you go on to various internet forums, which can be risky, to say the least, it can be risky, but if you go on those forums, what a lot of them are going to say is that these types of questions, data sufficiency, are very difficult. I want to talk to you about what data sufficiency is and how to approach one of these questions. What you want to do in a data sufficiency question is you are not trying to answer the question. That's the most important thing to understand right from the beginning. You are not trying to answer this question. All you are trying to do is figure out, is it possible to answer this question? Is it possible to answer the question? So we have here these two statements, and the question is Z positive? Is Z positive? You never actually have to answer that. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. You don't have to do that. You just have to be able to figure out, okay, with statement number one, could I figure out if it is positive or if it is negative? Could it be figured out? Likewise for statement number two, I can use that to help me figure out, is it positive or is it negative? And the way you want to analyze the answer choices, that's what these things are down here. The way you want to analyze these answer choices, statement one by itself is sufficient to answer the question. So this means that statement one and only statement one will answer the question. Two, statement two by itself is sufficient to answer the question. One is not. So first answer means one is sufficient to answer and two is not. Two means that two is sufficient and one is not. The next one, this is together. So this means that statement one by itself won't answer the question. Statement two by itself won't answer the question. But if you put the two together, that would answer the question. Next, you have the either. The either means that either statement by itself would answer the question. So statement one by itself would do it. Statement two by itself would do it. And then at the end, this is the neither option. So no matter what you do with those two statements, you could never answer the question. So again, your options are, it's one and only one. It's two and only two. Together they are sufficient. Individually they are not. E, either option by itself will do it, and neither option will do it. Okay, cool. So that's the breakdown. Now let's actually look at this thing. So in statement number one, in figuring out if Z is positive, here's the cool part. Note that in this quadratic, the last term is positive. Note that the last term is positive. I think you all know this, but what's the only way to multiply to a positive number? Well, the only way to multiply to a positive number is if you are multiplying a positive by a positive, or if you're multiplying a negative by a negative. So the point is, no matter what you do, no matter what you have to do in statement number one, you're going to be multiplying two positives or two negatives together. So they're the same. So if you went through the math, you could definitively realize that statement one is going to be sufficient to answer the question. Statement one by itself would be sufficient. And you can tell that again just by noting the positive sign at the end of this quadratic equation. So recognizing that statement one is sufficient, you could then eliminate answer two, because statement two says that statement two is sufficient and one is not. That's not true. We just figured out that one is sufficient. You can also eliminate T for together, because that says individually statement one and two are insufficient. Not true. We just said that one is. So you can cross that off. And then you can also eliminate N for neither. Neither statement is sufficient. No, we just proved that statement one is. Then you go to statement two. Then you would go to statement two. Statement two, the usefulness of statement two is very suspect because this ends with a negative number. And of course, we know the only way to multiply to a negative number is if you multiply a negative by a positive. So you have one negative number and one positive number. Or you have one result that is negative and one result that is positive, and no way to decide between the two. So you get one positive answer, one negative answer, and either one could work. And so statement number two, insufficient. You could immediately determine that statement two is insufficient. That eliminates the last possibility. So either is knocked off. That means the right answer here has to be statement one by itself. And you could choose the answer. Again, you don't have to work out all this math. If you wanted to, could you write out all of the math for both of these quadratic equations? Could you solve them using the quadratic formula or using factoring? Yes, you certainly could. Do you need to? No. All you need to do is notice that the one ends in a positive and the other one ends in a negative. And so answer choice one is sufficient and two is insufficient. Cool. That's how you think about it. So that's very quickly an introduction to data sufficiency. The big thing I would remember this little acronym, 12TEN, for understanding the answer choices. Because the answer choices to data sufficiency questions are always the same. They're always one is sufficient, two is sufficient, together they're sufficient, either is sufficient, neither is sufficient. So 12TEN. Remember that, and you'll be in good shape. Okay, so again, this question type is called data sufficiency. It's unique to the Gmat. Now, let me show you a question type that's unique to the GRE. This is called quantitative comparison. This is unique to the GRE. Only the GRE is going to have this. And what we're trying to do here is we're simply trying to figure out which one's bigger. Quantity A bigger or is quantity B bigger? That's all we need to do. Once again, we don't need to solve any of this nonsense. We just need to figure out who's bigger. So look at the initial rules. X, Y, and Z are greater than 1. They're all greater than 1. And Y is equal to Z. So these equations, well, not really equations, but these fractions, they look freaky. They look very difficult. They're not. Let me show you something. So immediately recognize that Y is equal to Z. So what we can do is we can come over here to this first equation. I keep calling it an equation. We're going to pretend these have an equal sign. Doesn't matter. Come over here, replace all of your Z's with Y's. Replace the Z with a Y. Then for quantity B, do the same thing. Replace all the Z's with a Y. From here, we're just trying to compare the resulting answer choices. We're just trying to compare these results. You don't actually need to understand the results. So for example, note that they both have the same denominator. Note that they both have an x squared and a y cubed leading them off. Note that they both end in xy squared. So look at what's the same. The things that are the same, the x squared, the y cubed, the x squared, the y cubed, the xy squared, the xy squared, the x squared y cubed, x squared y cubed, those are all the same. And so which one's greater? Is it xy squared or is it xy cubed? Well, it's xy cubed. And so the answer is quantity B. Answer choice B is greater. So the rule of thumb for these quantitative comparison questions is eliminate anything that is the same. Anything that's the same in these questions, you can cross those off, you can eliminate them. Whatever you're left with, whatever you are left with is what you want to compare directly. So here you compare xy squared and you compare xy cubed, and that'll get you the answer. Not as bad as they look, I hope. All right. So that's the way you want to break down individual questions on both the GRE and the GMAT. And hopefully something that I've demonstrated to you on these last couple of questions in particular is that you don't need to do a lot of math. You don't need to do a lot of math. Instead, you just need to think strategically, and you need to have good skills, good strategic thinking, and you can answer these questions. That's important to think about. Let me, I know we're getting close to the QA period here, so I want to back this up a bit, and I want to show you a verbal style question. This is a type of question that you would see in the verbal portion of either the GMAT or the GRE. I took this particular question from a GMAT, but again, it's the type of thing that you could see on either test. For all questions that look like this one, the very first thing you want to do, interestingly enough, is you want to read the middle. You want to read the actual question, the thing that actually has the question mark. That's the part to read first. So read that. That way you understand what it is you're supposed to do. This says, which of the following, if true, best explains the discrepancy outlined above? So what we know is we're going to be reading something that has a discrepancy in it. And it is our job to figure out what that discrepancy is and then to resolve it. So reading through this, at a large manufacturing corporation, the ratio of employee job-related injury insurance premium per employee to average employee annual net pay increased. Okay, so what you need to understand there is that the premium increased. That's really what that sentence says. There's a lot of filler in there, but this first sentence is telling you the insurance premium increased. So this company is having to pay more and more each year for its insurance. Now compare that with the second sentence. Yet the annual number of job-related injuries, so job-related injuries per employee during that time decreased. So now we have our discrepancy. Now you should have an idea of what the discrepancy is. The paradox here, the discrepancy, is that we have an increase in premium, but a decrease in injuries. So we have an increase in premium, but a decrease in injuries. And that doesn't make sense. If fewer people are being hurt, why are we having to pay more in insurance? So we would need to go through these answer choices and find one that explains why we have to pay more, even though fewer people are being injured. Let's go look. The first answer, A. From 78 to 03, the severity of job-related injuries at the corporation decreased significantly. If the severity of injuries decreased, does that explain why you'd have to pay more? No, right? If the severity of the injuries is decreasing, why are we paying more? That doesn't explain anything. So the first answer would be incorrect. The second answer, the number of employees at the corporation decreased. Now, this is sneaky. This second choice here, what this is doing is it's giving you a starting point, but it's not carrying through on the logic. So this is saying, okay, the number of people decreased. You might be tempted to go, well, if the number of people decreased, that means whatever it means. You never want to do that on these tests. The answer choice has to work on its own. The right answer has to be perfectly sufficient by itself and work by itself. So answer choice B here would be incorrect. That would be incorrect. That wouldn't work, because just saying the number of employees decreased, that doesn't by itself explain why they're having to pay more. So you can cross that off. Next, during the 78 to 03 period, inflation significantly eroded the purchasing power of the dollar. It's not that. We wouldn't be concerned with the purchase power of the dollar. We wouldn't be worried about inflation, because if you come back up here, the ratio of the annual job-related insurance premium per employee to average employee annual net pay. Because we're dealing with the ratio, we're not dealing with a dollar amount. We're dealing with a ratio. So that would account for the inflation. Cross off C. D, the corporation did not change its insurance provider. So what, right? That's the same problem as B. It did not change its insurance provider. Why does changing or not changing impact cost of premium? Don't know. We don't know. We would have to bring in extra outside information to answer that. And you never want to do that. You never want to have to bring in outside extra information in order to answer a question. So that leaves us with our last answer choice. Between 78 and 03, healthcare costs per job-related injury rose sharply, pressuring insurance providers to raise premiums. So the amount that the insurance companies would have to pay out per injury increased. And so answer choice E would have to be the answer. That would have to be the answer. So that's how you can think through a logic question in the verbal portion of both the GRE and the Gmat. Again, these question types, they can appear in both GRE and Gmat. They are more common in the Gmat. So you will see a few of these, but it's a relatively small number on the GRE. You will see quite a large number of these. About a third of your verbal questions will be of this type on the Gmat. Let me do one more question, and then I will open it up to a general Q&A, and I'll answer any and all questions that I can. So I'm going to do one more verbal question. Let's do this one. So this is more of a traditional verbal question. This question here is the type of question that you would expect to see on the GRE. This is unique to the GRE. The Gmat does not test you on vocabulary. So this question you will see only on the GRE. So this says, considering the difficulty of the great distance over which the expedition traveled, the journey was completed with very little incident and with noteworthy blank. So what you would do from here is you would go and you would pick answer choices. You would pick answer choices that match in with noteworthy. That's what you would want to do. Now, the trick to this is that it may not always be obvious. So we know that this trip, based on the first clause of the sentence, considering the difficulty of the great distance over which the expedition traveled. So we had to travel over a great distance. Just because you have to travel over a great distance, does that mean that that trip is inherently difficult? Just because you have to travel over a long distance, does that mean it's inherently difficult to do so? No, it's not inherently difficult to do so. You can go on a long trip that's relatively easy. That doesn't mean it's short. It could be long and easy. So what you would want to do here is you'd want to find an answer choice that means you did this quickly, because we are dealing with noteworthy crossing of a great distance. So noteworthy crossing of a great distance, those words would be alacrity and swiftness. So those would be the two answer choices you pick, alacrity and swiftness, because those two words indicate that you've done this quickly. You have done this quick-worthy, noteworthy speed. You would not pick answer choice A. A is the trap answer. A for success, with noteworthy success, we don't know if the success itself is what's noteworthy. Okay, we don't know that. because what we do know is that this is a great distance. So we know what would be noteworthy is doing it quickly. So we can cross off answer choice A. If we can get rid of success, you can also get rid of results. Those two words are more or less synonymous. Renown means it's famous. We don't know that this is famous. We don't know that lots of people know this. Accolades means awards. We don't know that this was given any awards. So you just need something to indicate that you covered a big distance quickly. That's alacrity and that's swiftness. And again, GRE, unique question. You wouldn't see this on the Gmat. All right. Let me pause there and check with my colleagues. I believe now is the time you'd like me to switch to a Q&A. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. Well, then I will switch this to a Q&A. Ask me questions. I will answer anything and everything that I possibly can about the GRE, the GMAT. So if you have questions about the test itself or admissions in general, feel free to ask me, and I will happily answer. And I see lots of questions already in the Q&A. So let me go through these and answer them, and then I'll get you your answers. Here's a good one. For how long is the score valid? It differs from the GRE to the GMAT, but years. It's valid for years. So as long as you don't plan to apply a very, very long time from when you take it, you're fine. It's valid for years. Right? Let's see here. All right, answered that one already. For the person who asks, I'm currently pursuing BCA and want to do master's in computer science, you are probably going to need the GRE. You're not going to need the GMAT for computer science. That would be GRE. Ideal GMAT score for an MBA in Australia, you would have to check. You would need to check on the particular admissions websites of the Australian programs you're applying for. It just depends entirely on the individual program. There's no countrywide catch-all score. Let's see. If you take the TOEFL, so the TOEFL and the GRE and the GMAT, they're totally different. So a lot of programs, a lot of schools are going to require you to take the TOEFL or the TOEFL, and they're going to require you to take either the GRE or the GMAT. They are different things. So you will likely need to take both. Let's see. Yep, next person asked, do I need to do the TOEFL or the GMAT or both? The answer is almost certainly going to be both, but you will want to check with your particular school to see what they want, but the answer is probably both. Let's see. Person who's asking about Canada again, if you want to do a business school program, if you want to do an MBA program, GMAT. Anything else, GRE. And here's the question of questions. How much time is required for the GRE? How much time is required to study for one of these things? All right, the answer to that depends entirely on what score you're starting with and what score you ultimately want to get, right? Because like, let's say on the GMAT, you're 20 points away from your target. You can cover 20 points in 2 weeks, not that much time. Let's say you're 200 points away from where you want to be. That's going to take you months. So what you need to do, what everyone in here needs to do, and one of the things I'd put at the top of your to-do list, Google, just do a search engine search for Kaplan, my company, Kaplan, 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 Kaplan free GRE, Kaplan free GMAT. And you'll find one on our website. You can just take it for free. So Kaplan free GRE, Kaplan free GMAT, just Google that and you'll find it. You can take the GRE and the GMAT for free and get a diagnostic score. You can get an understanding of where you're at score-wise. You then want to take that score that you got on our practice test, compare that to whatever score your particular school, your particular programs that you're applying to, see how far away you are. And that's going to help dictate how much time you need to spend studying. But the first thing you have to do is you have to get that diagnostic practice test score, and you have to know what your goal is. So figure that out. Figure out where you are, figure out the goal. Then you can have the conversation, how much time do I need? Let's see what else we have here. By the way, average though is usually a couple months. Usually about 1 to 2 months is average. If you're very close to your target, that goes down. If you're far away from your target, that goes up. But again, average is 1 to 2 months, but it really, really does depend on the individual and where you're starting and where you're going. Do I have to buy books to study the GMAT, or can I study online instead. Which is better? Okay, so when it comes to studying for the GRE and the GMAT, it's like anything else in life. You get what you pay for. If you use a free service online, can that be enough? It could be. But is a free service online going to be as good as a premier study plan with one of the premier test prep agencies like Kaplan? I'm gonna say no. It's not the same. You're not paying for the one, you are paying for the other. Right? It's like anything else. You get what you pay for. So if you are relatively close to your target score, if you're just a few questions away from your target score, then I would say you can probably get away with free resources, right? So on the GRE, if you're only 30 points away, if you're only 20 points away from your target, you can probably get away with the free resources online. If you're 100 points away on the GRE, you should probably take a prep course with one of the major test prep companies. Of course, I'd recommend Kaplan Test Prep, but I'm biased, I work for them. So figure out how far away from your target you are, and that should dictate the amount of time it's going to take you to study and how much money you should invest in your studying. If you're close, you don't need to invest that much. If you're far away, you should invest more. Let's see. Here's a good question. If your school does not require the GRE, should you take it anyway? The answer to that is yes, if you think you will do well. So if your school does not require the GRE, but it's optional, what I would say you should do is take the free Kaplan practice GRE. See how you do. If you do relatively well, then yes, take a GRE because it will improve your application. If you take it, you don't do so well, then no, don't do it if it's optional. Of course, you could study for it anyway and do it if it's optional. So will an optional score help your application? Yes, it will. Yes, it absolutely will. That's the short answer. So should you take it if it's optional? You could still probably take it if it's optional. It will improve your chances of getting into your program. Let's see. You should never leave a blank. So the question is skipping a question considered better than taking a guess? For both the GRE and the GMAT, never leave a blank. Never leave a blank. You always want to take a guess, even if you have no idea. There's no penalty for guessing. What's a reliable source for preparation for the GRE? Kaplan Test Prep. That's the company I work for. They helped me get my 99th percentile. I was a Kaplan student a long time ago, well over a decade now, but I was a Kaplan student before I became a Kaplan instructor, and they helped me get 99th percentile. I've had dozens and dozens of students get 99th, and I've had hundreds of students get into their programs with scores less than 99th percentile that are still really good. So Kaplan Test Prep is my number one recommendation. What I used personally before I worked for them. Let's see, what else? Other questions? What's the best range of scores to get into a top engineering colleges? Probably a 170 to 180 plus in a quantitative. Verbal, you'll want to do well, but you don't usually need to get above 150. So you'll want to get a very high mathematics score and a relatively lower verbal score for engineering programs. What else? Is GRE a must for construction management in the USA? Depends on the program in the school. Because of the COVID pandemic, some programs have waived the GRE. Some have not. So you're just going to need to do your research there. You're just going to have to do your research and see which programs require the GRE and which programs have suspended it because of the pandemic. And because of that suspension, if a school does not require the GRE, that doesn't say anything about the school. Lots of very good schools have waived the GRE because of the pandemic. Lots of very good schools have continued to require it because of the pandemic. So you just have to check. Many schools accept GMAT. Yes, they do. It's a different kind of weightage. General rule of thumb is that if a school allows you to take GMAT or GRE, you should take GMAT. Right? If you have the option between GMAT and GRE, you should take GMAT. But again, that's a generalized statement. You should look at the particular admissions website of whatever program you are applying to and see what they recommend. What most of them, not all of them, but what most of them are going to suggest is that GMAT is better. But again, do your research. Where can I find sample GRE questions? Just Google Kaplan free GRE prep, Kaplan free Gmat prep, whichever one you are. We have free classes that you can come to, sort of like this, but longer. So like I spent about 20 minutes doing questions with you. Those free classes, they spend about an hour and a half doing free questions with you. You can also take free practice tests there. So just Google that, Kaplan free GRE, Kaplan free Gmat prep. And that's where you can prep. Let's see here. Will universities place preference on GRE scores over other academic scores? Yes. Just straight up yes. Will universities do prefer the GRE? Let me go back to that slide actually. So heading back there, the GRE is the single most important factor. Again, that differs a little bit from one program to another, but GRE is the most important. General rule for both GRE and Gmat is the test score is the most important thing. Second most important thing are grades, academic grades. And then third most important thing is the quality of the resume. So extracurricular activities, volunteering, that sort of thing. So score, GPA, resume. Score, GPA, resume in that order. Good score for the GRE depends entirely on the program you're going to. It differs so wildly, I couldn't just give you a magic number and have it be meaningful. So you really just need to look up which programs you're going to and what they want to see for the GRE scores. Yes, there is a Kaplan Test Prep mobile phone app. Are there financial aid packages available for test prep? Yes. You would have to talk to our financial aid experts at CapTest, but yes, we do offer discounts in financial aid. For fall 2022, to which month can I appear for the GRE? Neha, you would need to check with your program because programs have wildly different application deadlines. So some programs, I mean, they'll be months apart. So that one again is something you really just have to check on your programs for. Kaplan does have free materials. It also, of course, has paid materials, but we do have some free materials. Just Google that. Let's see. Is GRE mostly to get into US and Canada and Europe and elsewhere in the world? GRE is pretty universal. A lot of programs are going to want GRE. Ideal mark for the Gmat, it just depends on what program you're applying to. If you're trying to go to one of the top business schools like Wharton, then you're going to want to get in the 700s. If you want to go to a very good Gmat program, 600s. If you want to go to a pretty good Gmat program, 500s. So 500, 600, and then 700 in that order going up. What would the universities require if the GRE is waived off? If the school has waived the GRE because of the pandemic, they would just require a resume, a writing statement, and academic information like GPA. They might require a research paper, example, depending on the program. Gmat is required for business school programs, MBA programs, occasionally finance and MBA adjacent things, but mostly MBA. £5 book for the GRE, is that enough? Depends on where you're at and how you learn. If you're the type of person who learns from using a textbook, yeah, great. If you're somebody who needs a class might be a better option. It depends on you as the individual. But I think that's the end of my time and I don't want to run over. Should I wrap it up there?
Yeah, those are some amazing tips, Phil. Thank you so much. And they'll definitely come in very, very handy. Thank you for having you here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Y'all have been wonderful. Best of luck with your studies and your preparation. If you ever need anything, come over to Kaplan, and I teach both Kaplan, GRE, and Gmat. Maybe we'll see each other again over there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Okay. So moving on to our next session, we have another very insightful session for you guys. So yeah, we'll be moving on to the next session now.
Thank you so much, Dishti. And it was great to hear from you, Phil. It was an amazing session. And We're slowly moving into our next session for the day, which is how to select the right university and course, right? This is a challenging process because it's the beginning of your entire study abroad journey. And having some clarity, having some understanding of how to go about this process is really crucial. And for that reason, we actually have two amazing speakers with us today. Just bear with me while I present my screen. All right. Okay. Perfect. So I'd like to introduce to you very quickly our two panelists for the day. Uh, let's start with Dr. Sean Cochran, who is the Director of International Recruitments at California State University, Long Beach. He strategically manages recruitment activities at CSU and their global agent network, which represents CSU all over the world. He holds a doctorate in educational leadership from Concordia University, Irvine, as well as an MA in linguistics from California State University, Fullerton. It's a pleasure having you on board, Sean, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the amazing things you have to say.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And moving on to our next panelist, Peter. Mr. Peter Lundby is Temple University's International Admissions Director. He's originally from Copenhagen, Denmark, and something interesting I learned about him recently, he's lived in 4 countries, but he's visited over 70 nations. That's amazing. That international perspective must be really interesting to hear from Peter. That being said, Peter's had about 15 years of experience in higher ed, and he's hosted hundreds of info and guidance sessions with students from all around the world. So, I mean, for any student looking to study abroad, this would be a great resource to hear about internationalization and, helping you realize your educational dreams. I'd like to quickly ask Peter if you'd like to introduce Temple University and tell us more about this wonderful university.
Yes, good morning from the East Coast here in the United States, and thank you, Aditya, for the kind introduction, and thanks for everyone for joining us this evening, where you're sitting. It looks like this slide is not completely coming up, but when technology is not working for us, then we'll just play along anyway. So it's great to be presenting Temple University here to you guys. Very, very briefly, Temple University is a public top 50 national research university, according to U.S. News and World Report, and is ranked as one of the top 100 best value in that category. Located on the East Coast between New York City and Washington, D.C., as you can imagine, when we're saying public research, it is a very large university. We have more than 150 plus undergraduate programs and about 600 programs in total. So you can study just about anything. We're also very happy that it's not just about academic. We have a vast variety of clubs and activities, including Division I sport. We do offer scholarships to international students, and we have a very, very active international program engagement to welcome you on campus. Our website is temple.edu, so it's very easy for you to find, and we're also happy to ask questions after this presentation. But let's go to the other side of the US. Sean?
East Coast, West Coast, right? Yeah. So I represent California State University, Long Beach, which is part of the California State University system. You may have heard of the California State system. It's the largest four-year university system in the world. And so our university system educates more than 500,000 students currently. I'm at Long Beach, which is kind of considered the flagship campus. We are the most popular campus. We receive over 120,000 applications every year. So we're a very popular destination. And for good reason. So we're in Southern California, as was mentioned. We're in the southern part of Los Angeles. So we're right on the beach, not in the downtown LA, but right on the beach there in the south. We're about two kilometers from the ocean. And so this may be one of the reasons why we're such a popular location. We have about 38,000 students and international students that are coming from more than 106 different countries. So we're a very diverse student body at our campus. We have over 200 programs, also in science and engineering, but we're also the largest publicly funded art and music school in the Western United States. So we're very comprehensive in that regard. You can see our tuition tuition there listed. That's the undergraduate tuition per year listed there. We also have highly ranked programs. For example, we are the #2 nursing school in America, as well as #1 in the state, and other programs as well. Our business school is AACSB accredited, and so we have some really excellent recognized programs there. In terms of US News World Report, we are regionally ranked, and so we are #3 public university in our region. And the last point that I put on there, because I like to put it on there, Long Beach, California has been ranked as having the best weather in the United States. So the average temperature is about 23 degrees just about every day, very little rain. So it's a beautiful place to study, but also with some great talent, great programs, and a very active community to get involved with.
Thank you so much, Sean. Actually, I myself studied in Philadelphia, so I mean, I can agree with you. Philly weather gets a bit cold sometimes, but when I visited California, it's definitely a beautiful place.
I just want to say it's 34 degrees Celsius right now. Just want to say it's 34 degrees.
I know it gets bad closer to September, but I mean, yeah, it's still the beauty of the changing seasons. It's something that I guess a lot of India doesn't get to see because we have pretty limited seasons in that front. But moving on, right, guys? Today, I wanted to quickly introduce what we're going to be talking about, starting with the common factors that you need to consider while choosing a program in university, and moving quickly on to how to choose between the various options you have. There are thousands of universities around the world, just like these two beautiful universities here, California State University and Temple, one in the East Coast, one in the West Coast. How do you decide which is the right place for you, right? Finally, the next thing we look at is 5 simple factors, steps to find the best fit university for you, and finding reliable resources to find that right information, right? And a bit more on that, finding the reliable information, we have an exciting giveaway, not just something similar to the other sessions, but there's something a bit more special on finding the right fit for you today. And I'll be getting more into detail on that in a bit. But getting started with knowing where and why. Sean, I believe you're going to be telling us more about this and taking us through this session.
At the initial part, yeah. So I've got some thoughts to share, and then Peter's got some thoughts, and then we'll be going back and forth on this topic because, as you mentioned, it's a very big topic.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I'll hand it over to you guys.
Yeah. So if you want to, I think you're driving the slides, right, Aditya?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can just let me know, and I'll be moving it ahead.
Yeah. Well, let's get started. So yeah, so as Aditya mentioned, you have, if you were thinking about the United States or even just North America for your education, you have sort of a good problem, I like to call it. The good news and the bad news, which is we have almost 5,000 different colleges and universities in the United States. Here you see a picture that shows, I believe this is the largest universities in terms of enrollment by each of the states. So you can just see some of the fact that every state in the United States has popular universities and colleges. And so you really do have a good problem where you have a lot of choices, but that can also be also kind of difficult then to choose which one is right for you. And I think to begin off, even before we get started, it's important to remember that all of these universities and colleges in the United States are excellent, right? Academic programs are always commented upon when people are comparing the United States for higher education. And so it's probably true that there's more than one right university for you out there. I think that's important. Before we get started, just keep in mind that there, with almost nearly 5,000 colleges and universities, there will be at least one that's right for you, but there's probably many that are going to be right for you as well. So on the next slide, what I'd like to show you is just why we know this is such an important decision. And those of us like Peter and myself who work in admissions, who work in recruitment, we know this is a huge decision. This is not just buying clothes or buying a large computer or something. You know, this is something where it's going to be your life for the next possibly 4 years. If you're going to do OPT internships, even longer. And no matter what place you end up deciding to go to for your education, it's going to change your life. The people that you meet, the experiences that you have, the way that you're going to grow as a person, it's going to change your life. So we understand this is a very important decision. And as I said, we should try to keep in mind that there's not just one school that's going to be right for you. There's probably many. And so you're going to have to make a choice. But fortunately, you also have lots of great resources. So iSchoolConnect, with the search aggregate they provide, family and friends, offices like Education USA, maybe there's a study abroad agency in your town. There's a lot of different resources that are going to help you make this very important decision. And we'll go to the next slide. So what we usually advise students to do, Peter and myself, is to think about what are the priorities, right? So there's a lot of things that make up your education. What are your priorities? And so what we usually would recommend is that you layer these out, and Peter has a nice little model I think he's going to be showing, but you lay these out in order to help you to narrow down what your what we call short lists would be. And that, by average, that's 5 to 6 schools. Most students, at least at the undergraduate level, they're applying to around 5 to 6 different schools, maybe more, maybe less, but generally around there. And that's a healthy number because you're not going to be admitted to all of them. You're not going to be offered scholarships, maybe at the same amount in all of them. So there's going to be different choices you're going to have within the 5 or 6 that you're sort of narrowing down. And I think we're going to look at some of that on the next slide here. So these are some of the common factors that students usually are thinking about. Maybe they're going to lay it out. The institutional type, the program offerings, the cost, financial, location. We've already talked a little bit about location and how that can be important just for your standard of living. Student life. Peter mentioned some activities at Temple and how active it is. Long Beach is as well. So what is the student life experience like? What is the admissions criteria? Rankings and prestige. The alumni network, especially as you get into graduate school. Those of you who are thinking graduate, alumni network becomes very important for job opportunities, and then some others. And on the next slide, we'll see some examples of what these are for each of these categories, right? So you have all of these different institutional types from 2-year, 4-year. Peter and I work for public universities, but there's also private universities. There's comprehensive universities. Comprehensive means it's not just liberal arts or just science. It's sort of a smattering of both. Both Temple and Long Beach were comprehensive. We're considered comprehensive. There's different specializations. So maybe they have your major, but they also have a concentration that focuses really on what you want to study or do, right? So here you can I won't read through all of them here, but these are some of the factors that kind of go into those categories to help you out. And we'll go to the next slide here to kind of put these together. And so you might think about it, and feel free to put your comments in the chat here as I'm talking, but you might think to yourself, okay, well, how might, if I go to a large urban university, like say Long Beach, in the city, how might that be different for my life and for my experiences than if I went to a rural city, more in a smaller town or outside of the large city? How is that going to make a difference? Which ones is going to be right for me and the kind of experience that I'm looking for? Because there are advantages to both. There are advantages to both, which we can talk about later. And then here's sort of the questions you're going to be coming up with, or you're thinking to yourself as you're starting to do your research. Could I choose a school maybe that doesn't have my exact major, right? So I was looking for material science, and I really want material science. This school's got mechanical engineering, but the cost and the student life is kind of what I want. So which one's more important? Having a major that's called the same thing that I want, or a program that is affordable and has an active student organization that can help me get an internship, help me get a job? You're having to think about all of these different things, and that's okay. There's no right answer here as to what you're going to decide on. And on the next slide.
Yeah, so I have actually one poll, guys. I wanted to check in with the audience. What is the most important factor, that students should consider when choosing a university? I'm just putting the poll up in a second. All right, that should be live. And this is just to take a look at what students really think of when they're taking into consideration these factors, right? There's a variety of things from programs and courses to rank, tuition fees, location, scholarships, test scores and test requirements. From what I'm initially seeing, a lot of students believe that the program and course that they're selecting, which is obviously the title of this session, is what the most important factor is. The kind of options that are available, the kind of degrees that they can avail, and how that might help, most likely get them on that path to getting that right career. That being said, I'm going to give it another 5 seconds at most. We're at about 80% of votes in. And yeah, that's about it. We'll be sharing this these results, and I'll walk you through them really quickly. Basically, about 42% of you thought that programs and courses, like I suggested, is the factor that's most important to you. But coming up shortly behind it at 20% is tuition fees, and at 17% is scholarships. Location and test scores were one of the least important factors, as at least people believe. Any thoughts on this, Sean or Peter? Do you think location and test scores should be this far down on this list?
Yeah, I guess what that's signifying, Peter can jump in here, but it seems to be signifying that they're not looking for schools maybe that are easy, which is good. I mean, I'm just going to assume that our students here, they're interested in the programs, they're interested in the academics. Even if the requirements are high, they're okay with that. I think that's a healthy response. I don't know, Peter, you want to jump in?
No, I absolutely agree. I think obviously we all know that tuition fees and scholarship as a counter to tuition fees are very important, but I'm very happy to see that the program and the courses are the #1 list for you guys, and we're obviously going to discuss that, so stay tuned.
Awesome. I'm just going to move ahead to the next slide.
All right, this is me. So we actually deliberately designed this presentation. I know there's an American flag here, and we say, basically what to study in the US or why to study in the US. But this presentation was made deliberately that regardless of whether you're interested in studying in the US, in Australia, in the UK, or Germany, I think I saw somebody on the question, you could actually hopefully benefit from this presentation. It is a global toolbox that we're presenting here. Also, regardless of whether you're looking for graduate or undergraduate. But Sean and we come from the East and the West Coast in the US. So these are some of the points that we would like to pitch why you should choose the US, or why we believe that the US is the best place. And this is really something that I got very excited about, because as a former international student, I have essentially been advocated for education in the US pretty much since I was 17 years old. So why come to the US? Well, there are just more choices than anywhere else in the world. There are more top institutions in the US at high quality level. But really, one of my favorite things, and I'm sure Sean will agree and get in on that, and this is that the universities in the US offer not only more academic opportunities, but they also offer a vast amount of flexibilities. And I can compare it to the Danish education system where I come from, that if you get admitted, for example, to biology, and then you get into the program, if you get in, then 2 years later, if you find out, oh, biology is not really for me, I like to change that. There's just no such option for that. So you can drop out and then you can try to apply again. The problem is in a social academic system where the government is, for example, paying for the universities, is that you drop in the rank to get into the university for another program. So basically it's like you snooze, you lose, and I am not a favor of that type of program. The other part that I think that we offer in the US, that is just exceptional support, specifically for international students. So that is also another great reason for studying in the US. So if you haven't thought about the US, those are just some of the main points, and there's a whole load other. I think we're going to go on to the next slide, and please be ready. I have a question for everyone. So Aditya already kind of warned you that we have a little 5-step rubric that we're going to try to share with you so that you can use that to find your fit. But we would like for you to put in the box, I mean, you sort of did already, you put the academic and you put the tuition, but within of those things, what are some of the things that are important to you? What does your dream institution look like? What does it have? If you could put that in the chat box, for example, maybe you're really like besides your academic program, of course, maybe you like to play tennis, for example, and this is very important to you. Maybe you are a skier and you want to go to school somewhere near where there's a mountain or something like that. Or let's promote Sean here a little bit. If you like beach, then I'm pretty sure Long Beach, hey, it's kind of says it in the name, right? I've actually been to the Long Beach beaches. They're pretty nice for West Coast. So let me try to see here if I can see the chat box and see what's in here. Exceptional packets. I like singing it. I love that. That is really, really cool. So really just a lot of input here. and you know, have the best coffee shop. Hey, you know, that's America do love their coffee, but I will say, I don't know, Sean, we've been around the world. Do we get the best coffee in the US?
Oh, I don't think we necessarily have the best coffee in the US, but we definitely have access to coffee in the US. At Long Beach, we've got 5 Starbucks on campus.
Hey, I think actually maybe that's because it's West Coast. I think we have 3 or something, but I think we have probably like 15 coffee shops or something like that on campus itself. So yes, so coffee is definitely important. I love those input. Aditya, I would love to see those afterwards if you don't mind. So, but let's dive into this. Sean's going to take the first point. As you just answered on the poll, this is the most important one. And I think Sean and I both agree, while cost and all of the other stuff is, you really need to choose the institution that has the program that you want to study. Sean?
Yeah, and so I think we're going to talk about academic fit here on the next slide.
Correct.
And so when we're talking about an academic fit, what does that mean? The university or college that you're looking at has a certain kind of, we might call it academic environment. And that is made up of a lot of things. It's made up of the caliber of students that are on the campus, right? So the students had to meet some sort of a requirement in terms of their grades or marks to be on the campus. And so that sort of sets kind of a tone. The faculty are a huge part of the academic environment of a campus because these faculty are going to come from other universities themselves, but they're also going to be having certain traditions. They'll have certain things that they're specialists in. They have, here's a really important one, especially for graduate school, they'll have a research agenda, right? So there are things that campuses are interested in researching. So maybe two campuses both have, let's say, computer science, but at one campus, there's a real strong academic environment encouraging, let's say, research on AI, whereas maybe on another side, it's video game programming, right? So you're going to have these 2 majors that sound the same, computer science, but they could be vastly different academically when you look at the curriculum, when you look at the faculty. And so when we're talking about a fit, what we really want to know is this campus going to fit what my dream is, right? What I want to, the kind of expert that I want to become in this field. We've had plenty of students who have applied for some of our graduate programs, for example, who have excellent grades, great GRE scores, all that. But their research interests, the things that they wanted to specialize in and research, did not have a good match to our faculty. And so our faculty in the, let's say, physics department or psychology department or whatever it is, would say, well, yeah, excellent grades, you meet our requirements, but it's not a good fit because we can't offer you what you're looking for. And I think that's the thing to remember. It's not just, do my grades match the campus requirement, but does the campus academic life, the academic environment, does that match what I want, right? Does that match my level of academic interests and so forth? And so I think that's really important to keep in mind. And then this last point here on this slide here, the reality check as it's written here, right? So to understand that, look, everybody, sure, apply to Harvard. It's okay. But understand that there's going to be there's something called an admissions rate, right? How selective the university is. 2-year colleges, if you're an undergraduate student, 2-year community colleges, they tend to have a much higher acceptance rate. It's more because they're focusing on access for more students. Other schools, large ones like for me, for example, Peter can share what Temple is. Our admissions rate is only around 30%, right? And in some graduate programs, it's even smaller than that. So it's important when you're applying to these schools to have in your mind, as you're jotting this down on your spreadsheet or whatever it is that you're using, to keep in mind the selectivity of that school, because you're going to want to have a reality check. Apply for those difficult ones, apply for the ones that maybe are not as difficult, but understand that at the end of the day, it's not just about the harder schools to get into means a better school necessarily for you. It's really going to be about what you want to study, what your dream is, and whether it's a good match. And again, if you're in graduate school, I always recommend students look at the faculty, look at who's teaching. Alumni is important in terms of job placement, but that faculty you're going to be working with for a long time. So you make sure that they're the ones that are interested in publishing in areas that you are interested in pursuing. So that's just a little bit here on the academic fit slide.
Sorry, Sean, we lost you for a second there, just on the last point.
I just was sort of wrapping it up. I was just wrapping it up to say, to keep in mind the selectivity of each of the campuses, to keep that as a factor, but also to think primarily, I think the main point Peter and I agreed on this area is that it's that the school has to match you too, right? That I think is the main point here. But yeah, we can proceed to the next slide. And I think this is for me as well. So Peter had mentioned to us in offline about that one of the top majors is undecided. Now, some campuses you can't do that, but this is actually true for most colleges and universities in the United States. The #1 major is undecided. Because a lot of students, they know kind of what they want to study, but they don't know the name of the degree, or they haven't decided which way they want to go yet. They're still exploring. Now, so keep that in mind. I think most of the time international students have some idea of what they want to study. At my university, you cannot apply as an undecided student. You have to know what major you want. Later on, if you want to change, there's ways to do that. But it's okay, I think is the point here that Peter and I want to make. It's okay if you're not 100% sure on what you want to do. And when you're applying to, let's say, 5 schools, you might be applying to slightly different programs at each of the school, right? So over here, I'm applying for data science. Over here, I'm applying for computer science. It's in the same ballpark of what you want to do, and that's okay. We all call things different at each of these different schools. So yeah, and so you'll see when you're looking at the curriculum, when you're deciding it, you'll see there's general studies, right? There's going to be general education, as we call it. Then there's usually something that's known as the major foundation. So you want to look at those courses, look at what you're being offered, right? So if let's say, for example, you're very interested in cybersecurity. Now, I don't have a degree at Long Beach called Masters of Cybersecurity, but we do have computer science. And if you look at our curriculum, if you actually look at the curriculum on the webpage, you'll see how much of the, let's say, cybersecurity type courses are offered. So you can make a decision based on if this curriculum is flexible enough for you. And then we just put it on here some of the other advantages, I think, of these schools. What sort of academic cheerleaders are there for you, right? So what does the advising look like? Are you going to have your own graduate advisor, for example? What are the services academically that the school is going to be offering you? Something you might want to look at. And then we've already talked a little bit about organizations. Very important, so important that you get involved in student organizations. If there are professionally affiliated organizations, these will really help to enrich your education experience and help you get that internship, help you get that job afterwards. I think that's really important that you have both experience and study from this whole thing. So these are some of the academically related factors when you're looking for a good fit. And I think with that, I'm handing it back over to Peter.
Hey, Sean, I know that we're going to be sort of pressed for time, but one of the areas that we spoke about before this session with academic fit and profile actually came up as a question in the question, and it's what are the students' hope to go with interdisciplinary research? What are some of the key factors to help determining whether a particular university fits our need or not? I think you should take that one.
Yeah. So the question again one more time is if
student hopes to go with an interdisciplinary research. So we were talking about the different academic profiles, right, in terms of the fit. And I know that we talked a little bit about that prior.
Yeah. There are a lot of schools, I think, in the US, which are starting to offer these degree programs, which are interdisciplinary. So for those of you who are thinking about what does that mean? It's usually where you might have where you might have a degree, 2 degrees at another university. Here it can be 1 degree, right? So for example, at Long Beach, 2 areas that we do this very well is combining, say, education and, say, science, right? So you can get a math degree or you could get an education degree, but we also have a math education or music education. That's interdisciplinary, right? We do a lot of this with business, right? So you have marketing analytics, which is on one hand business, but on the other hand is data science and so sort of sociology as well. So there's these different degrees out there that I think are fantastic, and I hope to see more of them at more campuses where it's not just, oh, you're a STEM student and you're not a STEM student, but finding a way to connecting those so that you have all the advantages of both kinds of study. We like to specialize in the US. You really get kind of focused sometimes, but I think it's also important that we have these interdisciplinary programs. So yeah, so this exists. You're going to find these. Usually universities will talk about them. They'll talk about interdisciplinary degrees, but you can also kind of sometimes see just from the name of the degree, you'll have something like math education, as I mentioned, hospitality management, theater management. These are different topics that are sort of coming together. So yeah, that was a good question though.
Well, I love the excitement of this, and thank you for sharing that. And we got a question answered, right? So, all right. So as we go through these, just keep thinking about those inputs that you put in the chat, because what we're going to see in the next couple of slides are exactly a little bit like that. So when we're talking about institutional fit, this is a little bit more of those soft areas rather than the academic. It might not necessarily be as important. However, the reason why these are important, and this is what we're going to use in the rubric later on, is that those are areas that will help narrow down the search. I saw several questions in there. How do we find this? How do we find that? Well, if you just search in, for example, MBA, you're going to find like 5 million responses, if not more. So you can use these institutional fit to define what it is that you expect your institution to look like. And what are some of those? I mean, the type, right? Is it a 2-year, 4-year? Is it a public or private? Are you looking to study at a large university, maybe with a large population, or different? So Sean and I, for example, comes from institutions that are considered large. We're not mega large, but we're in that 40,000 student range in the US. What type of classroom, are you looking for? Do you want to be in the lecture room that has 100? And by the way, for the record, I didn't for Harvard or Yale. Why did I not do that? Because their lecture rooms have 400 or 500 students, and I was not interested in that type of classroom. So if that's what you feel like is good for you, then that would be a good choice, right? So look at the student faculty ratio, decide if that's important. Diversity was hugely important for me back in the days when I was selecting college, but also here in my career now. I would not want to work for an institution that does not have a diversity profile. Institutional affiliation, there's different types. If you have, for example, a specific religious belief, you can find an institution with that affiliation. You can also find universities that are specifically mission-driven towards something, and you can find, nonprofit and for-profit. So it just depends on what fits your area. Institutional safety is just a little key thing. I think that's probably important to most. I haven't met any family as a student yet who says, yeah, I want to go to a place that is really, really, really dangerous, like a war zone. So, that should probably be a given one. Aditya, can we go on to the next one, please? Location, very similar, right? You could say if you come to the US, as you all know, it is a huge country. There is 5.5-hour flight between Sean and myself, and everything in between, you can find just about everything that you see on this list right here. So again, some of these things might not be important for the actually program that you're going to study, but they're important for the surrounding and what fits sort of the environment that you want to study. One of the things that I think Sean and I agree is when we meet students in big cities like Mumbai, like Delhi, like Shanghai, these students, they tend to be what I call urbanites, which basically means that they need to be in a city. They need to live in an area. So suburb and rural might not be for them. They very often also come from places that tend to be warm. So maybe you haven't considered, would you want to live in a place where it gets pretty cold for 5 months of the year? That's not Philadelphia, by the way. I think Aditya can probably testify that. But if you want a place that is sort of like the same temperature all the way around the year, maybe Sean's location in this is better. If you're into beaches, right? There are beaches on the East Coast near where I am, but Sean's campus, right? It's literally, I think, what are you, 3, 4, 5 miles from the beach?
About 2 kilometers. Yeah, about 2 kilometers.
2 kilometers, right? Even closer.
You can actually see the ocean. You can actually see the ocean from the campus. Yeah, it's pretty nice.
All right, now he's just bragging. We can see the river from where we are and downtown. So, but for example, if you are, if you like windsurfing or something, right? That's probably going to be difficult if you choose a university that's in the desert. If you like to go to the mountains to ski or something, so you can use those things to narrow down. And I'll explain a little bit later how this works. You might have a dream vision of where it is that you want to go. I know when I was 16, 17 years old and I actually chose to come to the US, one of the things that I ironically, coming from the northern part of Europe, I kind of wanted to go to a place where the sun shined a little bit more. So that was an important vision for me. Do you have relative supports, right? Does mom and dad say, oh, you need to go and live near auntie or something like that? Well, I had a student once who came in and say, yeah, I'm going to spend time with my aunts who live in New Jersey. And at this time, I worked for a university in the southern part of the US. I asked the student, do you have a private jet? Because if you're going to auntie every weekend, that's going to take some effort. You can't commute from New Jersey to a school, say in Georgia or in Florida or in California. So if that is an important issue for you and your family, that really narrows down the area where you're going to be looking for school. So I hope that makes sense. Aditya, the next one. Activities and fun. Again, and I think judged by the things that you put in the chat box, I was really happy to see that some of those things are important. And it was kind of like to put them together, you know, we're both talking about clubs, activities, organizations, but also internship, research, experiential learning. You know, if you study at a rural campus, it might be difficult to find internships nearby, which means that you would either have to commute long distance or you would have to relocate for the purpose of internship. And that would probably make it impossible for you to do, for example, a parallel internship while you are studying on campus. Study abroad, this I think is becoming more and more important. I see more and more international students who actually wants to, when they come to the US, they also want a study abroad experience, as in going somewhere else in addition to being in the US. So again, factors that you can put on your desired list. And I think we got one more before we go into the fun part. Cost and fit, right? This is, you mentioned it, right? That is very, very important. And this is also something that we really want you to be aware of when you apply. The basic part about this is that going to study in the US can be expensive. No, you know, it is expensive. I think that's fair to say, regardless of whether it's $25,000 a year or $60,000 a year, it is expensive. Be aware if you need scholarship. Not only that, also the institution that you end up applying for, do they have the scholarship that meets that gap between you being able to survive? I have heard students saying, oh, I just get a campus job. Well, be aware how much you are going to make, or I will say how much you're not going to make. You're not going to make $20,000 a year working on campus. And just for the record here, Education USA will be happy for me to say it is not legal for you to work at your uncle's company while you are studying, okay? So that would be a violation of the visa rule. So keep that in mind. And then the return of investment, job placement, expected salaries, right? If you're making an investment to study and you're going to take up a debt of 50 or 60,000, what is the expectations for job afterwards? Final part of that question is, does it fit your budget? It is really the answer that you need to answer the moment you have sort of narrowed down your search.
And if I can just throw in real quick about the scholarship too, a lot of times students, I know it, you know, scholarships are important. Sometimes students hear, oh, I'm getting $20,000 scholarship, and they get really excited, but they don't look at, okay, but what's the bottom cost, right? So if you go to a university that has a tuition of $50,000 a year and they're giving you $10,000 scholarship, oh, $10,000 scholarship, that's amazing. That's why I'm going to choose this. But what's the final cost? So just understand that there's two kinds of scholarships. There's lowering the tuition, and then there's them actually sending you money that you can use to pay for things. So just what is that bottom line amount? Don't get too excited when people start offering to throw money at you, because you have to look at what is that bottom thing. And as Peter said, does it fit your budget and your family's budget?
Absolutely, yeah. There are also additional costs outside, like, for example, flying there, cell phone activities, if you want to go on vacation, other things, right? Those are not added in when we say cost of attendance. All right, so really quick, we're running out of time on this. So, but on the next part, if you have 2 pieces of paper with you, you're going to be able to take part of this exercise and actually be able to use some of these to find your personal fit. Aditya, I think if we can just go to the next one and then the next one again.
Sure. Sean, Peter, there was just a quick question I wanted to ask you guys. This came up multiple times in the chat. So what is the maximum amount of scholarship that a student would be able to avail at either of your universities? Like, would there be a max percentage, or is it 100%? And this is assuming, you know, the student checks all the boxes and everything.
Peter's school and my school have vastly different, I think, approaches to this. I'll let Peter go first.
Well, I think the answer, Sean, is probably the same for both of us to some extent. There's really no right answer. I think for both of us, there's probably no full right because we are public universities. However, because we are huge institutions, we have colleges that are very, very independent. So for example, in my office, we issue merit-based scholarship based on your application. And then we have a couple of selected scholarship that you apply for. But if you are a strong student communicating with, say, the College of Engineering, you might get a scholarship from there. I have absolutely no hand in that. They have different amounts, just like we have on the Barretts. So I don't even know the final scholarship that students actually get because they get it at different fronts. But in general, for academic, in our place, the max that we have is full tuition, and that is extremely competitive. The average scholarship, I would say, is probably in the neighborhood of about $10,000 on the admission side. Sean, on your side, what do you think?
So at our university, as a California State University, because of the way that California does it, we do not have what is sometimes known as a vanity scholarship. So we don't do vanity scholarships. And what I mean by that is we don't have one sticker price that we discount for students who are have a higher merit. We always have the lowest tuition that we have. In fact, if you noticed on that one of that first slides that I showed, our tuition is only $16,000 per year. That's pretty low already. Whereas other universities, maybe they have a $30,000 scholarship, but then they have, $30,000 tuition, but then they offer you a $10,000 or $20,000. So they're coming down to about the same price range as us. It's just we don't have any kind of a scholarship to bring you to that amount. However, what we do have is merit-based, need-based scholarship money for our current students. So once you are a student at Long Beach, you've come here, you've already gotten your I-20, you're enrolled in classes, and you're doing very well. There are lots of scholarships that you can apply for. And most students will apply for multiple ones. It's not just one scholarship for a certain amount of money. It's women in engineering scholarship for $1,000, $2,000. It's international student ally for another $1,200. It's a bunch of different ones. And so between that and Peter mentioned working on campus in California, our minimum wage is $14 or $15 an hour. So you're making about $1,000 a month just working part-time on campus. And we're a large campus, so there's lots of job opportunities on campus. And then the final one that we haven't mentioned really yet, but I think is always important, see what kind of within financial assistance, what kind of payment plan possibilities are there, right? So at Long Beach, we actually let students break up their payments into 6 different payments throughout the year, possibly more. And so that really makes it easier as well. So there's a number of different kinds of financial assistance that a campus can give you. For example, we have a food pantry. So students can't go hungry on our campus. If you are running out of money and you need food, we have food for all students for free. And so there's a lot of different ways that campuses, I think, help students. Vanity scholarship, that is telling you when you're admitted that I'm going to give you $20,000, is not the way that we do it at Long Beach.
Absolutely understood.
That's excellent, yeah.
This reminds me of my time at my undergrad course. I also got reached out, very similar to how you explained, Sean, where they actually reach out to you after you've gotten admitted. So yeah, this just takes me back. Thank you so much for these insights. Moving on to the next slide.
All right, so this is the exercise. We're gonna take, it's probably gonna take about 5 minutes. I'm sorry we don't have more time. I hope this works for you. So grab the first piece of paper you have and then put it into 4 quadrants. And you recognize these as we went over then the academic interest, the location, institution, activities. You will also recognize that there's one missing, and that's the cost, but that's because we're gonna look at that later on. But when you have that ready, you can sort of make those 4 quadrants any way you want. Then go to the next slide, Aditya, please. Then write down all the points that comes into mind in terms within those areas, okay? So, what's important for you for the academic, we saw people in the chat that was writing down what was important to them, their location. So this is where you brainstorm, just put everything into those boxes that you like. The next one. Sorry, one more. This one was one where we were asking if you needed more time to look at this, but I don't think we're going to have that. So just go to the next one again.
Where am I writing down coffee shop, Peter? Is that institutional fit? Is that the? Is that where I put
That's,
coffee shop?
you know, I think that probably in activities, but it could be institutional fit. Yeah, must have 5 coffee shops. So what we did for you, we had actually planned on doing this live, but we realized that that was way too ambitious. So I filled out a pretend student. So this looks a little bit like this. I would assume as you fill out yours, you're probably going to have more. Like Sean says, I think in institutional type and activities, you could probably write coffee shop if that is important and give it a score. The important part, what you have to do here is that you will give those points a score. And in this model, you can do whatever point model you like, just as long as you're consistent. To make it simple, I used a 3-to-1, where 3 was the highest, 2 was, it's okay if it has or doesn't, and 1 would be like, it's not important at all. So if it doesn't have it, you know, I don't mind waiving it. So I put these on just for the benefit of actually making this presentation. Aditya, I think we can go on to the next slide. This is actually going to be Sean's slide because we were looking about the sources, and then we go back to the 5th point in just a moment.
Yeah. So we were just talking about how do you fill that out, right? So how do you know what your options are in order to put it into that thing that Peter showed you? How do you know once you have that list, you're going to be looking at it? So the reliable sources thing that Peter and I wanted to share with everybody is that there are a lot of websites out there. Be careful. Ones like iSchoolConnect and other ones, they're great in terms of how they filter things and let you look at them. There are a lot of not so reputable web pages sometimes that are representing the school maybe incorrectly. So it's always good to, if you can, once you've used something like iSchoolConnect to find a school that you're interested in, contact them directly. Don't rely on what my friend told me. Don't rely on some web pages, because sometimes the information there is not going to be up to date or even accurate. There's lots of, especially now after COVID, there's so many different virtual in-person things that you can do. A lot of different universities like mine, and I'm sure Temple as well, you can do Zoom chats with a recruitment officer. So see what kind of resources there are at the campus in order to get questions answered and ask questions, right? We love it when students ask us very specific questions about our campuses. When it's more than just, do you have a scholarship, but you're actually asking questions like, hey, what's your favorite part on campus, right? Do you have 5 coffee shops? Or what are some example student organizations I could get involved in, right? What are some companies that your students have interned with, right? I love questions like that because I love to see, because that really helps us see, are we a good fit for what you're looking for? So that's the college reps part of that there. And then yeah, start early for sure. What we know is that most students take anywhere from 18 months to 24 months in terms of researching and applying for the schools they want to go to, because it's just, there's that many options, there's that many things to think about. You have to do some financial planning as well. So start early, engage the universities directly, ask lots of questions, but not just questions about requirements and costs, but questions about the campus, questions about what the experience will be like. So many campuses now are offering virtual campus tours. Do one of those, right? So engage the university directly. And then going back to the top there, when you're using online to search, consider the source as we've written it here. I think that's very important. And then here's just a list of some of what those are. So we got iSchoolConnect. We mentioned iSchoolConnect. Education USA, all of their services are free. There's lots of study abroad agencies throughout South Asia that you can engage with. Social media, get on all the social media, follow them, see how active they are, look at their pictures. A lot of them will have students posting, and that's fantastic. If you can see what students are saying about their experience that they're having right now on social media, so forth, that's really great. So take a look at all of these different resources here.
Yeah, fantastic. So here comes the 5th square. So really, really quick, we already covered this. I think this will catch up. I think all of you are going to be awesome at math. So this is very important. You will need to first find the realistic amount that you can afford per year, okay? Then once you have found those dream institutions that we have looked for from in that quadrant, then you need to find out what their cost is. You take that cost minus whatever your saving is, and that gets you the gap, the financial gap, or your need that you need to find one way or the other. So when you find that amount, the reality check is to find out, can I make that up either with scholarships or either with campus jobs or maybe with the student loans or something like that. But as we stressed before, it is very, very important. And there is more to this slide, I'm just saying, that this is very important that fits, because as Sean said, we don't want people to either end up living on the street because they can't pay rent or because they don't have money to food. I know I can't see half slightly here either. I'm thinking that this is either the internet or something. There we go.
When Aditya has other windows, I think up, it just sort of blocks that part out. Yeah.
Apologies. Yeah. I think I just need to move around my mouse, but it should be fine now.
Okay. So really quick again, let's apply this because we want to make time for questions. So I'm going to show you, bring another piece of paper. Aditya, hit the forward twice. I think that's going to bring us to the quadrant. Maybe make sure that one more. Let's see if that comes up. Oh, yeah, that was one too many. Go one back, please.
Sorry.
There you go. So on your piece of paper, this is a blank one. I think you're going to recognize those things out on the left side again. Divide the paper up so that you have a left margin and then a top margin. And the first one's going to be your input, and then you're going to be calculating your best fit, and then the dream institution. And as I mentioned before, regardless of whether they are in Australia or in the US, you can put those names on. And now it's time, when you have done the research and found those within the fits, then you're going to find out what points that they're getting. And the next slide, Aditya, it's going to give us an idea of those were the things. And I apologize that the quality of this is not fantastic. I made changes to fit this before, and I was not able to get a high res picture. So, but you probably recognize them from before. All of those things that we had in the 4 quadrants are on here. So I hope this makes sense in practice. If we go to the next slide, Aditya. So here we have put in our fits, right? So this was our values. We have added our academic profile. We have added the desired majors. We have added so our GPA, if we have test scores or not. And then we have gone down and given that 2, 3, 1 values to those different areas in terms of what is important to us. We have also put in our budget, and then we have calculated our points. So the points that we have given here, just so we have a point idea. All right, if we go to the next one. When that comes up. So here you can see, I went out and I made 3 imaginary institutions. And if you take the first part, you can see that I gave them points according to whether they had the major in my first option or the second option or the third option. So you would obviously stay with the top one because that is your preference. What the requirements are at those institutions so that you can see whether they are fitting or not. And then as you can see, just going down the line, I found out whether they matched my desired or not. And then I calculated those points together down at the bottom. And I think you can see, and we're going to probably, I think I have that on the next slide, Aditya. You can see that the first institution was the one that matched the points. However, up on the academic profile, that might be a little bit out of our range. So those yellow highlights were the ones in each of those sections that matched best with our key points. So this is where you're going to have to use a little bit of selectivity in terms of what is important to you. Down at the lower part, right, with the cost, we want to make sure that this is very important again, right? So the cost of the institution, or what we call cost of attendance, or the I-20 amount, this needs to fit your savings, which was 25, right? So you can see that there's a gap. So if you're going to institution 3, for example, you need to find $10,000 in addition to your savings. So whether that is on-campus jobs or loans, etc., if that is the institution you choose, this is the way that you will apply it. We want to leave room for questions, so I hope that this just gives an idea of how to do this. Aditya, I know this was quick. You have some giveaways to our audience.
Thank you so much for just giving me a couple of seconds. Guys, I won't take much of your time. We'll stick to the Q&A as much as we can. There's a quick giveaway. There's a 9 Secrets to Study Abroad ebook. This is curated with hours and months of research and just gives you 9 key pointers that you might not know about that can help you study abroad and help you build your profile to get there in an easy way. For that, all you need to do is use this link, which should be in the chat currently, bit.ly /isc_fest_feedback_day_2, right? Feel free to go ahead and click on it and give us your feedback and get this ebook right away. That being said, we also wanted to speak about a giveaway with Peter from Temple. This is going to be something that's unique. This is the unique thing I was talking about earlier. One lucky student is going to get 2 sessions with Peter on study abroad consulting and finding the right university for yourself, right? So for this giveaway, there is another link, which will also be in the chat, bit.ly /isc_fest_find-your-fit. This is purely about finding that right university and course for you. And Peter, I wanted to ask, anything you wanted to add here on this?
Yeah, I just want to say, it is very important for me to say, I am not going to find the actual institution for you. I will guide you and help you use that rubric. If that is what you want, or if you just want to chat and ask questions, we can do that as well. But I will try my best to lead you on to find your best fit. So you still need to do the work yourself.
Of course, with the thousands of universities around the world, I feel like giving that task to you might become quite daunting. But I'm sure all the kids here, all the students here are.
It'll be a very fast conversation. Peter will just say, "Oh, Temple University. Oh, Temple University."
Hey, I want to go on the beach in California. I'm just saying.
I'd come back to Philly if I could, but yeah, that's just me. That being said, guys, I'm going to quickly move ahead to talk to you about the next session that's going to be coming up. There is another session coming up very shortly. Stay tuned. Before we get to the questions, I wanted to ask, guys, there's something that you mentioned about interdisciplinary courses, right? I wanted to check, would interdisciplinary courses be harder to get into? Would they have more prerequisites? Would they also lead to better career options in the future? Would you be able to guide me on this?
That's a great question. Yeah, Peter can come at it what it looks like at Temple. We have some that, so for example, there was a question in the chat about fashion and business. So we have fashion merchandising. And so the interdisciplinary programs, if it's sort of an art leaning, there might be an art requirement, like a portfolio, like maybe if you're doing a design type program, there might be a portfolio. What else? If you're doing an education thing, there might be more letters of recommendation that might be required from, say, an educational institution that you've worked with. So there's I would say, yeah, I'd say interdisciplinary programs might be a little more holistic in their admissions requirements. Typically, a lot of people are surprised at a large university like mine, and I know Peter's is a big one too. You know, we don't do a lot of we don't do interviews. Most programs at the undergraduate level do not require letters of recommendation and all those kinds of things. But there are some programs that are looking for a special kind of student, and so yeah, there might be some more of a holistic approach depending on the interdisciplinary program.
I might just point to the outcome. I think interdisciplinary or programs where you do a major minor, I think that is something that is highly valuable for students. So in my mind, you would definitely want to look at a university that has that flexibility. And that is really one of the key points in the US where you can, and even change, right, if you decide to change your mind.
Yeah, the major minor we haven't talked about before, but that's a good point, Peter. And I have a lot of students that come up to me who say, I want to double major. Can I double major at your university? So a lot of students are very eager to do 2 majors. My always thought is, well, yeah, actually you can, at least at my school you can. US education is very flexible, but do you really want to be a double major? Because you need to know what you're getting into. That's going to be 5-6 years of an undergraduate education. So the major minor option, which is very distinctly American, this idea that you can have a major, let's say business, but your minor is in music. And now you've really set yourself up to go into the music industry, right? So the ability to be flexible like that, I think, is fantastic option in the U.S. schools.
Absolutely, I completely agree with this. I actually did a major in business and a minor in law. So I mean, exactly what you said. Right?
Great example.
Makes sense. Gives you that flexibility, and I decided that, much like you said, a lot of students come in with that concept of not knowing which course they want, so they're undecided. I myself came in with business, but then moved into law because just found a passion for it. So just another really quick question, guys. What are the admission rates at CSU and at Temple? Can you guys enlighten us on that?
Admission rates, so the info. So this is actually really difficult because it's different from program to program. So we have several programs that have a much lower acceptance rate, but in general, in our undergraduate, it's at Temple, it's a little bit higher than it is at Sean because of the Cal State system. And sorry, Sean, I'm answering for you. But we're probably about 60% in the undergraduate program in general.
Got it.
Yeah, typically for us, it's closer to maybe 30 or 35% at the undergraduate. And then at the graduate level, it really does depend on the college.
Yeah, absolutely.
Engineering, computer science is very popular. We get lots of degree applications for that. And so they will range from 25 to 30% admissions rate.
Understood. Thank you so much, guys, for answering all these questions and all the guidance you've given us. I'm really sorry we didn't get to spend more time in the question and answer section, but our backend team has answered as many as they could. And I'm going to make sure that we pass on any questions or anything left to you guys when the time comes after the session. But that being said,
yes, so our emails are on there. I don't know about Peter, but I'm happy to get emails from any students about topics that I can help with.
Absolutely. And that being said, guys, there's another session coming up just in a few minutes. I'd like to bring Drishti back on board to take forward that session. It's on resume building, so stay tuned and make sure you're using all the links to connect with us in any way possible and ask us questions, plus the email addresses for all our panelists up here. So make sure you connect with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, everyone at iStudentConnect. It's been great again. Good luck with the next sessions.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Over to you, Drishti.
Just gonna be a minute. Yeah. I hope you all can see my screen. You all can see my screen, right? Perfect. Good evening, everybody. Good morning, Mutual. So thank you so much for joining in again for another amazing, insightful session. Today we have with us Angel Ahmad. She's been working with iSchoolConnect for the past couple of years and also has 20 years of experience in international strategy, marketing, business development, etc. Working closely with the university governing boards to implement admission criteria and identify qualified students. She has assisted thousands of students globally in gaining admissions to their preferred university. So moving on, today's agenda, we'll be talking all about what a CV is and what a resume is and the difference between the two, different uses of a resume, why do universities require a resume, key components of a resume, and tips to set your resume apart, and also do's and don'ts. So moving on to the next slide, I mean, Angel, would you like to take over from here?
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay? So our first question is, what is the difference between a CV and a resume? So one of the interesting things is many times students think they're the same thing, but actually a CV is a lengthier document which incorporates all of the levels of your career throughout your lifetime, as well as your academic credentials. And that's something that should be elaborate, having certificates in there, having the different references as well in there. And your resume should only be about 1 to 2 pages long. So that's something that's really important for students to understand when they're looking at the difference between these. A lot of times master's programs will ask for a full CV, and undergraduate programs will focus on just your resume because you're not going to have all of the elaborate experience as a master's program would.
Absolutely, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to the next slide, yeah. We have a poll. 1 second. Just a second. I'm having a.
You might need to move the mouse down a little.
I actually did that, but then, yeah.
And it's not, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. So we have a poll here. Where will you use your CV resume? And we will be starting the poll now.
So everybody can just answer, where do you think that when you're going to apply to, will you be using your CV and resume? So we have internships, universities, corporate interviews, clubs and organizations. So if you could choose one of those or multiple choice as well, we'd like to see where you guys are at in your thought process when it comes to CVs and resumes. So we'll take a minute here and let everybody choose. Okay. Just do you think all of the panelists have, or all the attendees have answered? You want to give it another minute? Okay. So are the results in?
I think we should flash the jawab. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So where will you use? So 12% said internships. Universities, 50%. Everybody said universities. Corporate interviews, 37%, and clubs and organizations, 2%. So these are all very accurate. I think at any point throughout your career journey or your education journey, you're going to need to have some type of resume and CV available for these types of for these types of entities, as well as several times just, you know, clubs and organizations, they also want you to have details on your resume. Many times they don't ask for a full CV, but they will, you know, ask you what your experience is for you to join that specific club and organization as well.
Moving on. How do universities use your resume to make admission decisions?
Okay. So this is really interesting. So along my admissions journey, when I was working with several universities, as well as I have many friends that work in admissions, a lot of times students they always think it's just test scores, you know, their academic GPA credentials, which are very important, but schools will always look at your resume to see what you've done. And that's something that, you know, you see a lot of stuff online where it's only about your test score, it's only about your SAT score. It's not only about those things. It's very important that when you're building out your application, you're building out all of your documents, that your resume it mirrors what you're putting in for your degree choice, on your application, because most admissions officers will use it to make decisions. It's a part of the admissions process. And in the US, we do a holistic review, right? So they're wanting to have candidates that stand out. Many times they have students that have, you know, they get thousands of applicants, and they'll have students that, you know, have the same test score or similar, and they're looking for some differences, especially in specialized programs and undergrad as well as masters. I mean, it's something that's I want to stress on this session, because many times students don't always take it as serious as it should be. But I know myself and many admissions officers, we use the resume to determine how successful the student will be in the course, especially if for some reason they've had maybe a little bit of a lower GPA at some point, or maybe their test scores weren't at the top 10 or something, you know, something like that. We look at the resume as if they have strong work skills. That's going to give them the soft skills they need to progress in school and throughout their degree program. So it's really extremely important. So universities will review your resume. They look at it when identifying if you're a right fit for the program. Many times for master's programs, some universities will waive the Gmat and GRE if you have X amount of years of work experience. So this is important to understand, that many of those MBA programs and master's programs will require some type of work experience to get admitted. So it is a very strong document, I would say just as strong as your test scores and your academic scores as well.
Absolutely correct. Completely agree with that. Moving on, points to remember in the scholarship essay. So, yeah.
So I think what's going to be important when you're delivering, whether it's your resume or your essay, you want to be authentic. You want to include personal details about yourself, Of course, your contact information, how to contact you, your LinkedIn, all of these things, but you are a brand. So your personal details and being authentic is so important. Your education is important, your work experience, any skills that you have. Let's say you're proficient in, all of these Photoshop or something, it's important that you elaborate on all of those skills. Also, research papers and dissertations. If you've done something as a part, in a teamwork and a team project within your other peer students, or even with a professor in collaboration with the professor, it's so important that you highlight these things. Your recognition and awards, extracurricular activities, co-curricular activities, as well as including a cover letter as a part of your scholarship essay. And then for volunteering and social work, I specifically put this on here because I think that a lot of students don't realize the power of volunteering and social work. In this day, a lot of admissions officers are looking for students that have that level of empathy, and they want to see that you volunteered. Maybe there aren't a lot of jobs out there, but what are you doing with your time, especially during the past COVID pandemic, right? There's not, a lot of businesses are closed, where volunteering, internships, these types of social work really impact your scholarship essay as well as your resume. So I want to just emphasize that. I put that there because sometimes students don't realize, being a part of the community can be such a huge value to getting admitted to a university. And I know many US admissions officers, they're looking for these types of students that will progress well and be a part of the university community. So if they see that on your essay and they see that on your resume, they're going to then feel you're going to be a part of that university community and really make the university make a difference in the university, because that's what you've done throughout your education journey in your high school or in your undergraduate degree.
Correct. I'm sure you all are making notes and taking these points into consideration when you make your resume. So moving on. Yeah.
So how to set your resume apart? I think there's an image here.
Yeah.
So one is you want it to be crisp. Making sure everything aligns, your font's aligned. It looks very clean. No spelling errors. That's going to be really important. I always tell students, have like 3 or 4 people look at it. It's going to be really important. Make sure in all your fonts, the bolding of it is very clean. That's really, really an important first step for your resume. That it's cohesive, it makes sense, and it aligns with the rest of your application. So many times students won't, they'll write their essay or, they'll send in letters of recommendation, and it all doesn't link together. It's going to be really important that it's cohesive and it matches your application, your reference letters, and your essay. Complete, again, so many times I've had students come back to me and their application materials weren't complete, their resume wasn't complete. There were large gaps between timelines, right? And some of those things, universities want to know what you were doing.
Right.
Honest. So this is the thing with the day of social media, people can find out who you are. So if you're not honest on your resume and you're not concise, people are going to find out. I think the first thing every admissions officer does is look up students. Like, that's just the way we do. Just like we look up each other, and everything is available on social media. So if you're not being honest and forward about, your experience, university is going to know. And I can tell you, sometimes even when you're communicating with a university, many times I've heard officers say, well, this student told me something different, it doesn't match. And they're looking for those things. Alongside, when people have to review you based on documents, they're looking for your strengths and they're also looking for your weaknesses. So being honest and making sure everything tells a story about you is very, very important.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So unique, I think this is something that more and more students need to focus on. I see a lot of applications, a lot of resumes that come through, and everybody kind of does the same thing. I was in, the beta club, or I, did this. It's something that stands out to you. Sometimes it can be a hobby that you have, or maybe you play a specific sport, something that really shows who you are. And that authenticity now is so important because people want to connect with you. And admissions officers have to choose you between thousands of applications. So they want to be able to read your documents and look at you and tell a story about who you are. And that's something that's really important. Your tone, there's a thin line between overselling yourself, right? And many of my international students, they tend to elaborate a lot and oversell themselves. And I think what's going to happen is you want to make sure that you're a full quality candidate and the reasons why you want to study here. And your experience is one of the steps that have allowed you to take this journey and choose the specific degree program. So the tone of your resume has to make sense. When you're writing the details of what you've done and accomplished, make sure it's concise with the position of what you actually were doing at the university. So that's really important. Again, dynamic. Everybody, every single admissions officer, every single university, no matter their ranking, are looking for dynamic students. They want students that they can actually have, and you stand in front of a committee and you're advocating for these groups of students, right? So it's important that you do have that dynamic go-getter attitude, because that's what you need to succeed in higher education. It's not like secondary school. So all of the admissions officers, and I think that's a big component that a lot of times students don't realize, these admissions officers, when they accept your application, you fall into their funnel, which means they also want to make sure your likelihood of being able to get the visa and want to come to the school is there, because so many students are now applying to so many universities. If you're not really eager to come to that university, they may not accept you because another student, did the virtual tour, attended a session with the one-on-one with the officer. These are things that university officers are looking for. Also tailor-made to that university you're applying to. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten resumes and essays and it was the wrong university in it. That's just something that you always, you're applying to, 4 or 5 universities. You have to make sure that it's tailor-made to that university and that degree program. So that's so important, not just sending out mass generic stuff. You actually want it to be clear. And all of these touch points are very, very important. Again, to emphasize, they're reviewing thousands of applications, especially from countries like India, South Asia. There's so many students that want to come to the US. So they really need to understand what the difference is between this student and all other students.
Correct. Moving on.
So some of the things that you need to avoid. So a lot of times you see a lot of resumes come in. Everybody's using design graphics now, but I think the first page needs to, especially when a lot of times admissions officers, they read so many resumes that when they're looking at your first page, it needs to be concise, right? A resume should only be about 2 pages long. So you don't want to put the least relevant information first. Like, it's good to have your contact information. A lot of times you can put it in top in the header or even in the bottom, but you want to put the most relevant information at the top. No irregular text. Like you can see in this document, there's different bolding, different fonts. It's so important that you don't have that, different types of text, insufficient style of sharing information. I've seen resumes come in with similar to this with a whole bunch of emojis on it or graphics, and that takes up the majority of the page. Even I seen a resume where it was the whole photo, the profile pic was most of the resume. Those are things that you want to be cautious of. Also making sure it's complete. Again, at iSchoolConnect, we do a lot of reviewing with the students and helping them to prepare their resumes. It's really important that you have things double checked. And this is some of the stuff that the iSchoolConnect counselors do is prepare your package, because you'll only get one review at that university. So it needs to be right. And it needs to be reviewed by multiple people. No matter how top your test scores are, it's so important that it has incomplete information, because universities, once that admissions officer looks at it, you're either in the accept, waitlisted, or reject. So these are really important areas to avoid, spelling areas, all these little things. The university admissions officers will notice them because they're looking at so many.
Absolutely.
Okay. Next slide. Okay. So must-haves. Let's talk a little bit about, since we talked about what you shouldn't have, we're going to talk about the must-haves. Clearly mention to whom and what and why and what the purpose of this resume is, right? So what your objectives are, what your goal is with this resume. A lot of times students will include some type of cover letter, but you can also put this on the main doc. mentioning your strengths most relevant to the job description or to the degree program, right? So you want to make sure that you're mentioning your strengths of what you've done through your work experience that's also relevant when you study. Those are important things that universities look for as well. Give social media handles only if you have curated valuable content. And I can tell you, all admissions officers look students up. Even the deans of the schools will look you up. So it's very important to have your social media relevant, especially if you want to study, because people are going to judge you that way, especially when you're applying for admissions. Having your LinkedIn up to date, many times the university counselors or even alumni will have different pages on LinkedIn. It's important that you join those, but also make sure that your LinkedIn matches your resume. I could tell you so many times where, you make your resume look good, but then you forget about all your other social media, especially LinkedIn. So admissions officers do use LinkedIn when they're looking you up and when they're trying to identify you as a candidate. Talk only about relevant experience. So, the thing with the resume is we can go on and on about the different things we've done. And, I saved this dog from a tree and, all these different things. We have to make sure it's relevant. And that's where, when you're writing these, only 2 pages is what we recommend for the resume. Making sure the design is print friendly, easy on the eyes. Many times admissions officers, they're reading this from a computer. If the font's too small or the font's too large, it's going to bother their eyes, right? So they're reading it from one of CRM and, they're going through your essay, they're going through all your documents at once. So you want to make sure that it's friendly on the eyes and it has a good design and print friendly for them in case they need to print all your documents out and send it for approval to a dean of a school. So that does happen quite frequently as well. Always speak about your most recent academic achievements. And if there was a gap, as I know a lot of students are experiencing this with COVID because they finished school and they're taking, a gap year. What have you done during that time? What's relevant that you've actually done during this COVID time? Maybe you took an online certificate, maybe you joined some groups or some associations. These gaps between when you graduated and now are still going to be important to fill. You don't want to just say, I've been playing video games. Oh, I haven't done much the past year and a half, right? That's why it's important to make sure that you're aware of that. If there's gaps in your education or gaps in your employment, you explain what those are.
Absolutely. These are some very important must-haves. And these are some that may make or break your college application. So yeah.
So important.
Yeah. Sample format.
Okay, so here's a sample format, and we also have some giveaways here, so we'll be providing more. And there's a lot of stuff online. I think whenever you're looking at a resume and your goal is to go into higher education, you need to make sure it's relevant for higher education, right? And sometimes, you can have multiple versions of a resume depending on what degree program you're applying for. So first, the basic thing is efficient use of space. No large icons, no large emojis. You don't have, your contact information should be relevant in there, but you don't need to bold it. There's certain things that you need to make sure that you do. Standard formatting, simple information hierarchy. I think, first of all, your objectives should be clear, your academic qualifications, your professional how clear this resume looks in the format is very important because, again, an admissions officer will take maybe a minute to read these things. So they need to be able to quickly see what you've done and how you stand out. And only relevant content is important for the resume.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's another sample format. I know a lot of people want to include images and, I think that that's fine. It just makes sure that the image isn't taking up the entire page, right? But it has a simple design flow, a comprehensive flow, and it's relevant format. Again, these are just different examples based on where you're applying. A lot of times people want to see who you are. They want to see that you have relevant experience, especially if you're applying to a degree program where you're going to be working amongst people, right? So this particular resume is a sample of an HR professional. So they want to see your, how you work with people. So sometimes including a photo is fine. Just make sure that photo is professional. That's important. Do not, and even match it like your LinkedIn photo, make sure it's professional. It can be authentic. It can say who you are, but just make sure it's professionally done. Okay. So we have a lot of highly creative students. So you can see here, this is a student that's applying for like a design program that has that design skill, right? And these things are fine. And many times art programs, they're looking at your portfolio, and this is a great way to lead in. I even know some students who will put this out and they also include, a website with all of their information. It's kind of their bio website. So you could, so when you're applying to a creative program, it is important to showcase your design skills and ensuring the content is it's comprehensible and it's understandable. Like that's really, really important, especially with design schools and applying to design programs. Use white space and content hierarchy to highlight your skills. Again, even if it's designed in a format like this, it's still important that it's easy to read and it highlights information. It's not just pretty colors. So that's something that's really important. And the design language is consistent. That's, sometimes we can get really creative and use a lot of colors, and that may not be the way you want to go. Here, a simple, clean format is really important, even when trying to be creative. Okay. So where to find the best templates and tools for references. So I can tell you many universities, and at iSchoolConnect, one of the things our counselors do is, as we're looking for the different universities students want to go to, we actually have profile pages of all of our universities. And that's something where going directly to that university and looking at samples, or being able to work very closely with your counselor to understand what that resume, what that school is looking for, or that particular degree program is looking for, will really help you. I've seen a lot of these student blogs and, students Google resume formats, right? And it's not really geared towards universities. I also think the way that you're going to apply it, depending on if you're looking for an undergrad course or a grad course, it's going to make a lot of difference in how your resume should look and the template you should use, the types of program you're applying to, the university you're applying to. So I would say one of the best places to find it is at that university, looking at what they've done. Sometimes they'll have samples of what their admissions requirements or their admissions documents look like. Even sometimes they'll say only submit a one-page resume. And if you haven't reviewed that, or your counselor hasn't reviewed that, they're going to automatically say you didn't have that attention to detail. So it's very important not only to take some of these, free templates, but also to look at the universities you're applying to and see what they require. So that's really important, I would say, is for the tools for referencing, and working closely with your iSchoolConnect counselor. They will help to provide you some of that information as well.
Absolutely. So we have another very important and a very insightful session coming up next. Meanwhile, we are flooded with a couple of questions. Would you like to answer them, Angel?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, perfect. So,
okay, what's the first question? I love questions. So,
just a second.
Of course.
Okay, before that, we have a very, very exciting giveaway for everybody. So whatever Angel mentioned right now, all those very important tips and tricks, we have an ebook of 40 resume templates, which you can gain access to by filling just a feedback form. It might be somewhere in the chat. It's already in the chat, and you just need to fill the feedback form, and you'll receive the giveaway. Okay, talking a little about iSchoolConnect. So iSchoolConnect basically helps students reach their goal of studying abroad, studying their desired course in a university, their dream university basically. So from expert counselors to artificial intelligence-based technology, we assist students to search and apply to their dream universities. Again, the Q&A now. I'm not able to access the Q&A. I think the backend team will be working on it. Moving ahead. So talking a little about the iSchoolConnect community. iSchoolConnect community is the fastest growing and the largest study abroad community in India. And we are connected across multiple cities and in the simplest way over WhatsApp groups. And you can connect with mentors, you can connect with like-minded people and help with your study abroad procedure.
So I can see some of the questions. So one of the questions I see is it necessary to provide social media handles? So this is what I would say to you. Definitely, I think universities will look for LinkedIn. That's something that they'll look for as for social media as well, even though it's not real social media. You don't have to provide your Instagram and your Facebook and your Twitter and your Snapchat. I would actually advise not to do that, but just understand that schools may look you up and those things will pop up. Important to look yourself up and Google yourself, right? And see, to see what pops up, but you don't need to include everything. If you have some relevant to your work, like some students have good blogs, or maybe they have some designs on their Instagram, I would recommend not including all of them, but ones relevant to what you're applying for. But LinkedIn would be one that I think that most of the universities would look for.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the questions I see. So I'm just looking through, there's a lot of questions. So does online courses and their certificate matter? That's a great question. So I want to say right now, universities, when they're applying students for this, they're admitting students for this fall, they are looking at what you've been doing. So yes, online courses and certificates matter. They matter more now than ever, especially with COVID and the increased availability of online certificates. I do think you want to make sure the certificates that you're taking and you're listing are relevant to what you're applying for. So, let's say you took a certificate in how to cook Italian food and you're applying for MBA. That may not be relevant right now, but so you want to make sure that you're using your time wisely. And now is a good time to post any type of certification, as long as it's relevant to what you're applying for. Okay. Let me see. Trying to read some. I don't know if you see any. Are you able to see the chat as well? So I see a question about what is a cover letter, and please elaborate on that. So many times the cover letter will go in front of the resume, and it'll actually direct the university admissions rep on what your goals are, almost your objectives when you want to apply to this university. So many times students will cater their cover letter to the specific university and degree program they're applying to, and then their resume is generalized. And that's perfectly fine as well. So that's what the cover letter will be used for. That's an important, if you're applying to multiple universities and degree program, is to explain, who you are and what your goals is in that cover letter. So I did see a question, how much does work experience matter on the resume? So I'll say this, and this is a good question, undergrad versus grad. Many times undergraduate students, you may not have worked or had any experience working. So it's not as relevant for undergraduate employment. Many times undergraduate degree programs and institutions, they're looking for students to have good volunteer, maybe some internship and activities within the school. Work experience is relevant when you're applying to master's degree. They're looking for candidates that have had some work experience, especially MBA programs. Many of them require work experience, but I think all master's programs are looking at what you've done, in career-wise, especially if it's been a few years since you studied your bachelor's degree. So that's important. That I would say the weightage is pretty high in your work experience for master's degree. I would say 70–80% is what a university is looking for of somebody that's actually worked. Okay.
There's another question in here, Angel. Hi, sorry, I just jumped in, but another question.
I see a lot of questions, so I'm trying to go through them, but yeah, give me the most relevant ones.
How helpful are recommendation letters, and do we attach them with the CV, or do we keep them as separate documents?
So I definitely think recommendation letters are very important. I mean, again, even at the undergraduate level, they'll want some recommendation letters from your teachers or even some organizations that you work with. But it's definitely important to have them. I'd say many of the top universities are looking for those letters, and it's not just having a recommendation letter. Who is the recommendation letter from? Is it from a professor? Is it from your boss at your job? I think that's going to be really important. And again, many of them for master's programs, they're pretty much mandatory to be required. So again, they're going to be really important that you have the recommendation letters, and it's aligned with your resume, right? So if you have work experience, they are expecting, your most recent work company you work for to give you some type of reference letter. So that's something to keep in mind. Many times students will get like an uncle or, a friend of a friend, but they're not able to get reference letters from the employer on their resume. And sometimes that can be a red flag for institution, especially for master's programs. That's going to be, master's programs are very challenging in the US to gain entrance to. There's a limited amount of spots. And when you're an international student, there's even a less acceptance rate, right? And, there's a lot of students applying from, Asia, especially India, China, right? There's a lot of students. So they're going to really look at some of these things closely when they're reviewing international applicants.
Awesome. Another interesting one, would posting pictures of books that someone's reading on their social media accounts be a good idea? And maybe we can expand that a bit and say, would showcasing these things or posting about them or making sure that they're prominently visible on your profiles, would that be a good idea?
So I think pictures, an admissions officer, when they're looking you up, they don't have time to go through your entire social media. I think that's important. I think if you're reading a good book and you want to share it with your audience, that's great. But I don't think it's as relevant. They're not looking for all the good things you did on social media. They're actually trying to see, is there something, a little off within the student, right? And that's something that I think is relevant. So they're not going to go and spend so much time on it. Like admissions officers, usually on an application, they'll spend maybe about 30 to 45 minutes on the full applicant, reading it, reviewing depending on the program. Some, they can spend a couple hours, but, I think anything positive you can keep on your social media is great to have.
Got it. Another interesting one, should we include pictures of ourselves on the CV or the resume? Is that helpful? Does that make things easier for the admissions officer?
I think that including, and I know I've seen a lot of these come through the past few years, is where they've included it can make a difference. Like it's almost like a human nature is to connect, right, with people. So when you see somebody's face, you're like, oh, I think it depends on the picture. You're making sure the picture's professional, and not taking up the entire page. I like the one resume we sent as an example, the picture's there, but it's almost as like a background image, like as on the tab sides, right? So I'd say having a small photo or something. I've seen a lot of people do this, a lot of students do this recently. It's not a bad thing. You want to make sure the photo is, professional.
Absolutely. Okay, this is another interesting one. Would having a YouTube channel or a blog be an extracurricular activity? Does that count?
So I definitely think so. I know a lot of universities were offering, had students do some videos for scholarships. I think, especially when you're applying to creative programs, many times, film programs, the art programs will require some type of, video interview, like where you've done a video and you tell about yourself or talk about something relevant. Again, whenever you have these things, I think understanding that, professionalism around it, are they controversial? Right? You want to make sure that whatever you have is relevant. If you are doing something and you're writing a blog, I definitely think you should include it. I see a lot of students doing that now, where they're blogging and, or they have some type of website where they're pushing out content. I think it's happening more now than ever. These things weren't around 10 years ago, right? So definitely for creative programs, they're looking at those things. I worked for a creative school and they, we had many students sending us their website and sending us, short films they did, which I think that stuff is great, so it's, I think it's good as long as it's positive and relevant.
Awesome. There's adding on to this question, does having more of a portfolio, be it like, in the sense of how many YouTube videos you put up, or if you're a designer, how many designs you create, does that have more emphasis than your resume itself?
Again, it depends on the program. So if you're applying for something like computer animation or gaming or one of those types of programs, that stuff will be relevant. They want to see your portfolio. They want to see the work you've done. Many universities require that. So I think on the previous sessions, Sean was from CSU Long Beach was stating that, they require a portfolio for some of their fashion programs. So it's good to have those things with the creative programs that you're doing, or even if you've done like a research paper and that happens to be published. If you have published work that's done well, that's relevant to your degree program, yes, it would be good to include that information.
Awesome. Okay. Another question: how many LORs would be recommended? Like, would you suggest what is a good number of LORs to get?
I would say 2 to 3. Again, making sure they're relevant and connected. Like that's the piece that I think that happens a lot, where students send in a lot of information, but it doesn't connect to what they're trying to do. You know what I mean? It doesn't connect to the entire application. I think what's important is always remember when the students, when the admissions officer is reviewing a student's application, they review everything simultaneously. So they're reviewing your application, they're reviewing your documents, they're reviewing your essays, and they're reviewing your resume all at once. If they're not cohesive and they all don't align and tell the full journey together, that's going to be something that they're going to flag, because it's not going to make sense, right? So if you have some work experience on your resume, or you have recommendations, it should match what your application and your essay say. So that's something that I think is more important than how many. It's what's the content.
Understood. And would you suggest a split between academic letters of recommendation versus professional letters of recommendation? Should that be an even split?
I would say an even split. And again, if you're applying for an undergraduate program, professional references, I think they are looking probably more for academic. Whereas if you're applying for a master's program, they're looking for maybe one academic and the rest be professional.
Got it. Awesome. There was another on somebody that's slightly more hesitant to post on social media, somebody that doesn't want to put themselves out there as much. Would that impact you? Would not having a social profile, or maybe having one but barely posting anything, would that be something that hurts you?
Not really. I don't think it's a requirement. With social media, I think seeing individuals that don't use it is really pretty. It's impressive now too as well, because there are a lot of people that use it too much. Again, I think with social media, it's not a matter of you have to have it. It's what the content that you're publishing on your social media. And again, students sometimes don't realize that you're a brand, and when a university accepts you, you're a representation of that university. So how you carry yourself is going to be really important, and that's something that I think when you look at a student's social media, and not every admissions officer will look at it, but some do. Some will actually, I've seen it happen. I've seen, especially students that get waitlisted or on the edge, they're trying to determine character, and everything is visible online. So that stuff that I think is definitely the content that you're pushing.
Got it. Another point on the LOR, how quick does it become irrelevant, right? Somebody asked, what if I use my 10th grade principal's letter of recommendation? I assume they did really well in the school, which is why the principal has recommended them, but they're applying for their master's program right now, so which is at least about 5 to 6 years down the line. So would that still hold valid, and would it have as much value?
So I know that many universities ask for recommendation letters that are relevant to your most recent experience. Now, that's not to say as if let's say you continue to volunteer at this high school, or you've come back and done, something to give back to it, and you're still involved, then that letter of recommendation can be, it can matter to your portfolio, to your application, but they do ask for the most recent, which is important, right? So again, master's programs are always they're going to scrutinize that application much more than an undergraduate student. So I would definitely say having the most recent, they're going to look at your resume and they're going to say, okay, you're currently been working at this job for 2 years. How come you weren't able to get a letter of recommendation from this, what does that mean? Yeah. And again, it just matters how relevant and how active you are in that community where you got the letter of recommendation from.
Right. Coming to maybe an LOR for a PhD, is there a difference over there, or would you maybe have a different kind of approach? Would you just focus on your professional experiences?
I mean, I definitely think PhD programs are very challenging, right? So you're going to want to make sure that you're emphasizing your professional experience, as well as the person writing the letter of recommendation is relevant, right? So who's writing, this letter of recommendation? And PhD programs, even perfect test scores, all of these things, sometimes it does matter to, that PhD program, who you've actually worked with in the past. So I would say most relevant, you want to have a solid letter of recommendation when applying, and that it's recently relevant of something that you've been working on, whether it be when you completed your master's or your work experience. You can't submit something from 10 years ago to a PhD program.
Right. So there's somebody that has a really interesting point for their resume. They've done a whole lot of social work, and they've done a lot to support students through various organizations, various initiatives, and various kinds of social work, right? But they don't have any proof of concept. They don't have any way to show that this is actually physically done. They just have their experiences and their stories to tell. How could they go about showcasing this in their resume? Would you suggest that they do this and even include this, because there's no paper trail or proof that they've done?
So I think, there's a lot of people that do stuff like, they'll give back, or they have, different times of the year where they'll host, be a part of an event, and, I saw one of the questions at an orphanage or a nonprofit. I think those things are amazing, are great, but collaborating and spending your time with one that will give you a letter of recommendation is really important, because schools want to see a commitment. They want to see that you committed to something, you were passionate about something, and you were involved, not just you did something once a year, or every Christmas I went to the church and gave out homeless people. They want to see the commitment, and that's something that's really important. They want to see that you committed to an organization for the past 4 years. Maybe you only did it once a month, you did something, but you were committed, you were a part of the community and the mission. So I think that's important, that you get involved and you stay involved in some type of non-profit or volunteering organization.
Right. Got it. There's somebody who's worked for 2 years before their masters. Sorry, for 2 companies before their masters, but it was very short-lived, about 4 months at each company. So they weren't actually able to get an LOR. They're wondering if they should even mention this professional experience in the first place, because again, like you mentioned, why am I not able to get an LOR from a recent work experience? I guess here it's more time frame that's causing that lack of LOR. So how should they go about this?
So, I mean, I think sometimes, like, if they have short-term employment, and if it was like an internship or just a part-time job, that wouldn't be as, relevant. But again, what I find is a lot of students that will, they'll have something on their LinkedIn, and then they don't put, you got to make sure it's very concise on what you put on your LinkedIn and what jobs you showcase, and what you showcase matches your resume. I would say, even if you've done it for a short period, but it was relevant to the job or to the degree program, then it is good to include it. I mean, and I think, universities don't expect you to get a letter of recommendation from every single job that you've had, right? Like, they do expect certain ones that you have that are relevant to the degree program. I think that would be most important, that you do list it on there, even if it was a short time. Now, if you have like five different jobs you did in a year, you've got to pick the most relevant there.
Right. There's another point that I wanted to ask. Would something like the ISC community, this is a group where students can interact with each other and learn about the study abroad journey, would this be something that can be added to your resume to showcase your commitment to studying abroad, or putting an effort to work with the community towards that?
Definitely. I think any type of community activities, especially reference to globalization or overseas studies, is important, because there's a lot of these communities at universities. So iSchoolConnect, I know we work closely with students and supporting them on the journey, and just having these live discussions, even the International Fest, and all the students. I see so many questions coming through where from your experience, you learn from your peers, right? So joining these communities can definitely help build your resume for a university. It also will help your knowledge base, right? The values and the knowledge. So you'll learn from each other by joining these type of communities, and then you can definitely list it on your resume. So the ISC community, we do a lot of overseas study, like not only knowledge building, but also peer-to-peer mentorship, right? And that's something that can definitely help you build your resume, right? So being a mentor, being a part of a mentorship programs are very relevant. It's not volunteer experience, but it is professional experience. And that's something that I know that iSchoolConnect has, and we evolve that with our students and staff.
Got it. There's another interesting one. If someone is, apologies, I just lost the question right as I was asking it. If someone is going to post his accomplishments today or in the near future that he achieved a year or sometime long ago, would that be okay? So basically, posting about it or talking about it quite a while after it was actually achieved.
I think it just depends, right? I mean, sometimes there are certain jobs you've done or careers you've had that really touch you. I know that through my, I talk a lot about my time when I worked for, Eastman Kodak or whatever in the past, and it was a long time ago, but it touches you and it teaches you a lot. So I think if it's relevant and it's something that you went through and it might have been, if it's a year ago, it's still considered recent, right? So I think that it just depends on what that content is, what the job was or the experience was, and how relevant it is to the rest of your resume. Does it make sense to what you were doing, right?
Absolutely. Somebody else asked, should the LOR be addressed to somebody? Should it say to whom it may concern, or should it be addressed to the specific person that most likely will read it?
So this is an interesting thing with LORs. So different universities have different systems. So many times you address it to whom it may concern or dear admissions officer, right? Sometimes the universities actually, when the student completes an application, they list their references, the name and email, and then the university actually will send them a form to fill out. So I know that a lot of universities are going that route where you may have a letter, but they may actually want the person to fill out that letter. So that's something to keep in mind. And then it would be that the individual would just fill out the form and put all your strengths. So keep that in mind. Many universities are doing that. But to answer your question, I would say to whom it would be concerned or dear admissions officer, that would be fine. Generalized is fine.
So somebody who's studying biology asked if they believe that their physics teacher knows them better and they're applying for a biology course, would it make sense still to get the letter of recommendation from that physics teacher who knows them better, even though it's a course that they're not focusing on?
I would say, of course, you want to try to get it from the course you're focusing on. If you cannot, then your physics teacher, as long as you've done something recent, not your physics teacher from 5 years ago, right? Like as long as it's recent, that would be fine as well. But the goal is always try to get the most relevant information, the most relevant letter of recommendation from who you're involved with within the past year or most recently. But if it's not possible, you need to have something. So having that physics teacher would be fine as well.
Got it. Somebody asked, they've heard that a certificate from an NGO, a not-for-profit basically, would that add value to your admissions profile? They say that they believe it would, but I want to take your opinion on that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I think universities value. Again, when they look at candidates, there's a lot of candidates with good test scores and academic scores, but they're not community builders. And I think collaboration with the university is important, especially the larger schools. They want students that can come on campus and be a part of the program. So definitely nonprofit NGOs are excellent certificates and letters of recommendation to have.
All right. Angel, any questions that you're seeing in the chat that jump out to you? If not, I think we've answered quite a bit of them. There's a lot of them that are being repeated. So for all of those of you that are asking questions that are being repeated, we're sorry we're skipping past them, but we will make sure to be share this recording with you, so you will get to see those responses and you will get your answers soon enough. But in the meanwhile, Angel, anything that you found interesting?
No, I mean, I did see a question about like campus ambassador internships, when applying to a master's of science program. I definitely think being on campus and being an ambassador, getting involved in the school, your current school is important because universities will look at that. So I definitely think that those types of internships will help. There's a few questions on how many LORs. Usually for master's programs, I think the standard would be 2. Some schools will ask for 3. But I think the standard is 2 letters of recommendation. Let me see. Should certificates be attached to the CV? Yes, the certificates can be attached to the CV when you send in. It should, for a CV, it's different than the resume. I think we highlighted that the CV should include all of your entire academic journey and your professional journey, right? So your certificates and transcripts, those types of things can be included in the CV.
Absolutely.
I think that's good. And then again, I know the iSchoolConnect team can answer any of these questions. Students, if you have more questions, I'm happy to spend some time with you. And I know the team at iSchoolConnect, we work on these questions a lot. So happy to the team will be answering you, and once the session's over as well.
I think there's one final question that we can take up, Angel. Interesting one. Would starting your own business be considered a good point for your resume?
So I can, it's interesting. I think that I know when I was an admissions officer and admitting students, entrepreneurship was really important, right? I value that, and I think many universities do. It just depends on the business type, right? So it depends on the small business, what type of self that you can clearly explain what you were doing. But I definitely think entrepreneurship is a strong skill. I see a lot of students doing it where they're selling stuff online, and this generation has the ability to do things without having to invest a lot of money and build different, I see YouTube channels and all these different things that are happening. So I definitely think it means a lot. It just has to make sure that you're clear on what that business is, what you're doing, what's the business plan layout. It's very clear and concise. So the admissions officer, it's not just something small that you did, right? It's not something you're doing as a part-time hobby. It is a business, and it's something that you're running, and you have goals towards.
I feel like what you just mentioned, right? It has to be relevant and it has to be a viable business. I feel like having a business of your own could open up quite a few more questions coming towards your way when you're doing that interview with that admissions team. And maybe opens you up to share more details about you, right? Maybe that allows you to speak more about yourself and sell yourself better to that university. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I've seen a lot of students that apply for MBA programs, and many of the times, like they're running a company already, or they have a store, or they're and they're doing something, and the reason they want to study their MBA is to take the business further. So that's definitely very relevant. And I mean, I think if you're running that business already, then you would want those questions. And I think that's where admissions officers, as long as it can all make sense, and it's, I've seen resumes where they include the website of the business, and they talk about it. It's in their essay. The reason why they want to study this MBA in the US is to expand their business entity, right? So that's where it all needs to tie into your entire application.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all the time, Angel, and all the wonderful answers to all these questions and all the information that you shared with us in the entire session. I think this was really great. Just anything you'd like to add here?
Nothing here. Thank you so much, Angel. It was lovely having you with us.
Thank you guys so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Guys, we're just shy of 3 minutes from our next session. This is going to be a great session. Before we get into that session, I'd just like to tell you, you can reach out to us using our email ID or our phone number. It's really easy to connect with us at any point. That being said, at 8 o'clock, we'll be starting off with what to expect in a letter of recommendation with Matt Jacobson, Laurie Etier, and Christian De Gregorio and I'm really looking forward to that next session. But that being said, feel free to engage with us using any of the links in the chat. Our team is consistently posting them, and we'll be taking questions also as the session is going on, right? All right. In the meanwhile, I'm just going to go ahead and take over the screen share, Drishti, if that's all right.
I'll do that. Over to you now.
Thank you so much. In the meanwhile, guys, again, thank you for sticking with us through the entire session. It's been a long day and it is a weekend. I completely understand how, everybody wants to spend time with their family and friends in the weekends. But that being said, it's a pleasure having you with us throughout this entire session. I am just going to quickly go ahead and share my screen in a second's time. And while we're waiting, I'd like to tell you guys that there is another whole day tomorrow with a variety of events on the different aspects of studying abroad, things that we haven't covered yet and things that you can learn about. So make sure to stay tuned. Even tomorrow, 5 p.m. onwards, we'll have 4 more sessions with amazing speakers that will be coming your way. Apologies for the delay. I'm just figuring out how to get the screen share up. Should be up in a second. Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Matt, Laurie, and Christian. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Fantastic. How are you doing?
Doing amazing.
Excited to be here. Good morning.
Good morning. I mean, good evening or good morning, depending on where we're all from. But thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to quickly go through the introductions. I'd like to introduce everybody to Matt Jacobson, Christian De Gregorio, and Laurie Ethier. I'll just quickly walk through each of their profiles. Matt Jacobson is Dussier Global Schools founder and CEO, and he works alongside presidents, prime ministers, global CEOs, and other prominent leaders to deliver on the vision of providing sophisticated tertiary education, as well as while investing in educational improvements to public education systems across African nations. Moving on to Christian. Christian has been in the field of admissions for over 21 years, and he has an MS in secondary education counseling, as well as is a frequent presenter when he often advises students in crafting their college essays, how they should search for universities in the United States, and what goes on behind the scenes when a student application is being reviewed, right? And he's currently the Director of International Recruitment at York College of Pennsylvania. And finally, we have with us Laurie Ethier. Laurie is the Associate Vice President for Admissions at Midland University. She's dedicated to student success, knowing that each student has their own definition for success, right? Her higher education experience includes student affairs, academic advising, and most recently, admissions as well. She's eager to be a resource to each of you during your college research, and I'm more than excited to actually hear from each and every one of you today. That being said, I'll quickly walk us through the flow for the day. We'll be starting off with what is a letter of recommendation, and moving on quickly into who should write your letter of recommendation, followed by a stepwise guide for drafting the LOR, as well as the best practices for the format of an LOR. And finally, we have what is a personal statement, as well as, of course, tips for succeeding with all these documentations. That being said, like with every other session, we do have a great giveaway lined up for you guys. So be sure to stick with us till the end. I'll pass it over to you, Laurie, to take us ahead. Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thank you. And as he said, my name is Laura Ethier. I am joining you today from Fremont, Nebraska in the United States. And so when I said good morning earlier, it's my pleasure to spend this morning with you and share a little bit about letters of recommendation and other documents that are needed as part of the admissions process for various programs. So let's start. What is a letter of recommendation? A letter of recommendation, often referred to as LOR, you may see that on many application checklists shortened in that way. So it's a way for universities to evaluate who you are and learn more about you and your personality using a third person's perspective. This is not a document that you will write, but you will guide the process in gathering these materials and working with other connections that you may have to develop this sort of letter. It's a way for the university to measure your skills and your accomplishments, and they're going to ask you to get this feedback from either a manager or one of your professors or a coworker. So simply put, it's a way to find more about you for the university to find more about you through a third party. So I've seen letters of recommendation been written by an employer. So if you have a part-time job, full-time job, or maybe you have had a previous campus job, if you're looking for a master's program, these would all be very appropriate people to reach out to ask for a letter of recommendation. This is a document that will support many of your other admissions documents. And so this is a really, really good way for us as the admissions representatives to get to know you on a deeper level. My colleagues here will share a little bit more about tips for success, what should be included and things like that. But I think the biggest takeaway when learning what a letter of recommendation is that this is a document that's written by somebody else as a reflection of you and your talents and skills and what you may bring to the program.
Sorry, I had to unmute. So greetings, everyone. Good morning. My name is Christian De Gregorio. I'm from York College of Pennsylvania. York College is known for a lot of the programs in engineering We do have paid internships for engineering. We've been around since 1787. We are indeed a university, so a little different from the UK system. My information, contact information is at the bottom there. You can reach out to me on WhatsApp. I'd be happy to chat with you at any time. Next slide, please. All right, so what are the top factors that you need to consider, and how many letters of recommendation are you going to need? In most cases, you should kind of plan for having about 2 or 3 letters of recommendation. How long should that letter be? Normally about 3/4 of a page to 1 page. Letters that go on and on, 2, 3 pages, you want to kind of squeeze that down. You have to consider that you're applying to a school that may be receiving many, many applications. So they have to read all of these applications, and sometimes getting through, long personal statements, long letters of recommendation, you actually don't grab the reader's attention. So the committee members looking at this, and you wind up losing their interest if things are too long. So you do want to keep them, 3/4 of a page, 1 page long, and that's about it. That should do the trick. And kind of like Lori mentioned, who should write the letter? Well, it should be most likely a professor, someone who works with you, someone who knows your work academically and professionally. I do often get asked the question, and I got it yesterday from a student in India, can a family member write my letter of recommendation? No, that is not the best person. There's something called bias. I would never get a letter of recommendation from a parent that says, excuse me, I don't know about this student. That would be a bit concerning. So a professor, a manager, coworker are all really good suggestions. And what should go in that letter is how the writer or recommender knows that student for how long. So in what capacity? So for example, if it's a bachelor level student, it could be, I am a math professor. I taught this student. We covered, CBSE curriculum, just a quick little introduction. I taught them for 2 years. That's all really, really good work. That's something that we want to hear, a great introduction. And why does the letter writer think that you're a strong candidate? And I kind of broke it up into some academic traits and some personal traits. So your academic traits might be, they worked on a certain project. They did this in the classroom. They turned in all their work. They were a very reliable student. Those are all great examples. A personal trait might be something where, I will use the math professor example again. Okay, I taught this math professor, I taught this student, and at first they struggled, but they worked really hard, and now they're one of the better students in the class. They turned out to be, a really great student. That's a personal trait. We get to see how well the student is able to overcome obstacles. We get to see a little bit about their resilience, so that would be a personal trait that we would want to see. And we do, again, want to hear about the positive qualities about the student, why they would be successful at my school. And a letter writer should maintain a positive tone throughout the entire letter. All right. So there shouldn't really be anything negative, or if it is, it's how they overcame that obstacle or that situation, whatever it might be. Next slide, please. If a letter is for scholarship, all right, so there are different letters that need to be written and different formats. For the most part, again, what I covered in the previous slide would apply to all of the letters. But if one's particularly for a scholarship, the letter writer should include how the student meets the criteria for a scholarship. So for example, we have, our school, York College, Pennsylvania, has some very high level scholarships. And there can be letters of recommendation that can be submitted for that. The letter should apply to the criteria of the scholarship. In this case, would be about research. So if the letter writer is just stating, it's a good person, they're good in the classroom, that might not be a beneficial letter. I want to know, since the scholarship is tied to research, what research maybe the student has done in the past, the capacity or potential for the student to perform research. I want that letter to directly apply to the criteria of that scholarship. It's very important. And how the student not only deserves it because they're a hard worker, they're very bright, and so forth, but they have the financial need. Okay, so it's kind of like we want to make sure that if they get the scholarship, that it is within their budget. And how the student going to contribute to the university or their field or their community. If it's a computer engineering student, maybe they want to go back to where they're from and improve the infrastructure for Wi-Fi. That's very noble. That's something that we definitely want to see. Next slide. If it's a master level degree, I know many of you are interested in master level degrees, it's less personal traits and more of the academic work. What have they done, previously in the classroom, research and so forth? Those things should definitely be in there. One last note of cheating on letters. All right, we take this very seriously in the United States. Cheating letters, falsifying letters, and I have had students do this where we've called on the phone or emailed the recommender and say, did you write this letter? And a number of cases where they said, no, I did not write this letter. And oddly enough, they said, I would have been happy to write that letter if that student would have asked me. So if you do falsify a letter and you get caught, in most cases, you will be denied automatically and not allowed to reapply. So we do take it very seriously here in the United States. So
Christian,
over to you, Matt.
Guys, I had one question for you here. So oftentimes you'd mentioned like if a student cheats and if they write their own LOR and submit it on behalf of somebody else, that might be an issue. But in India, I've seen this happen quite a few times where organizations will ask the student to write their own LOR, and then they'll take that, work on that a bit more, understand that student through what they've written, and then based on that, decide what they want to sign off on. Would that be something that falls under this category of cheating?
As long as the professor has the capacity and ability to edit the letter and submit it themselves, that's fine. What we don't want is the student writing it by themselves, forging a signature, and then emailing it on the professor's behalf without them ever seeing it.
Understood. Thank you for that point. Over to you, Matt. Sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Okay, hi everyone. My name's Matt and I'm from the Desir Global Business School, and it's a real pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you today. Excited to be on this panel with both Christian and Laurie. Christian and Laurie both represent fabulous United States colleges. We actually represent British colleges, which is maybe why the picture of that campus from our University of Wales partner looks probably a lot older than some of the US colleges might be. The partnerships that we represent are the University of Wales and the University of London, which are quite, University of East London, which are quite historical institutions, both from the 1800s. And so I mention that because the British system is different to the US system in a few ways. And that includes what would generally be expected in a letter of recommendation as well. So just be aware, firstly, if you're applying to a school in New Zealand or a college in the US, or maybe a school in Germany, make sure that you try to do a little bit of research on what might be culturally expected in that environment, because something that might be really suitable for England might not necessarily be exactly what Laurie or Christian would be looking for in the US. So I just think that cultural context is one of the first statements I would say, and doing a little bit of research there. I think a lot of what all of us are saying is universally relevant, but certainly just be aware that there's also some cultural sensitivities and cultural differences. So if you want to just jump onto the next slide. Thank you. So who should write a reference letter and how to approach and prepare a referee? So these are really, really great points, because Laurie and Christian have already given some background information specifically about the letter, the construction of a letter, which is really, really excellent. What I just wanted to mention was a bit of practicality on how do you actually get a referee to write a letter and the best way to prepare them. So there's just a few things that I wanted to kind of mention in the context of how to get someone to prepare you for writing a letter of recommendation. So one of the first things to do is to essentially remember that the people that you're going to be talking to and asking for a letter of recommendation, just assume a few things. So firstly, you know what you're looking for and you're aware of what a letter of recommendation is, even more so after this panel and hearing from the speakers today. But you should assume that the person you're asking has maybe never written a letter of recommendation, doesn't really know what a letter of recommendation is, and doesn't know what should go in it. And also assume people are just generally busy. You know, people have families, they've got work, etc. So you don't want to make it hard for someone. You want to make it easy for someone. So specifically, when you're asking someone for a letter of recommendation, this is on the don't side. Don't simply email someone and say, could you please write a college letter of recommendation for me? Or could you please write a university letter of recommendation for me? That's definitely what you shouldn't do. What you should do is then not really assume that the people that you're asking are not very familiar with your career. They might know that you are working as an accountant, or they might know that you're interested in engineering, but they might not really know the detail of your career. They might not be aware of what school you're actually trying to get into or the specific program you're trying to get into. And they might not know about some of your broader accomplishments. So kind of assume that they don't know the detail. They'll obviously know about you as a person and your kind of general field that you're in. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense that you were asking them for a recommendation, but they might not know the specifics. So in asking for a letter of recommendation, I would spell it out for them. So I would be saying, for example, you know, would you please write a letter of recommendation for me? That would be really helpful. It should take you approximately 5 to 10 minutes to write. Should be no more than about a page. And I've included a little bit of key information for you that might go into a bit more detail than you might otherwise know. And this might be kind of similar information that you'd have on a CV or a LinkedIn profile. So, you know, you work 2 years at X and 3 years at Y. You're applying for a bachelor's of engineering at the University of East London. And some of your key achievements that help to boost your authenticity as well. So there's some of the things that I would actually be spelling out and giving a bit of background to someone. Laurie actually is going to be talking a bit more around personal statement. And so I'll leave it to Laurie to talk about that. The only thing I would mention is when writing a personal statement, I would do that first before you ask for the letter of reference, because you'll already be thinking about what are some of the key things that actually go into a letter. So you're kind of doing your own part of the work first, which might make it easier then to provide the relevant facts and information to the person you're asking to write a letter. So I would do your own homework first, write your own personal statement, and then provide a great example of a letter of recommendation. Again, assume the person's never even seen a college letter of recommendation before. So just attaching and saying, hey, if it helps, here's a really great example of what a letter of recommendation should look like. So, you know, definitely feel free to mention, you know, that you want them to conclude with why they think you would be a really suitable candidate, or as Christian said, a strong candidate for a program, and why you would overall be a great contribution to the school. In terms of who would write the letter, just think about it in the context of relevance. I think we already flagged that it shouldn't be a family member, obviously, shouldn't be a conflict. But aside from that, think about someone who is well respected and someone who is relevant. So if you're applying to do an MBA, maybe a general medical practitioner wouldn't be that relevant as a person doing a letter of recommendation to do an MBA program. On the other hand, if you're applying for a medical program, it would be absolutely fantastic and excellent to have someone who was a medical practitioner. So just think about, the context of what is the field, and someone who can write a letter that understands that field, because it's more relevant to know whether you are suitable for that program. So if you want to just perhaps, I don't think we can really read that letter, but that is an example of a letter. So maybe if anyone wants an example of a letter, I'd say we're very happy to share that afterwards. And you can email that through, because that's an actual letter of recommendation. The black is obviously taking away people's names, but that gives really the right structure of the sorts of things that I talked about, and sending that to someone with a few key points. I think you'll get a lot more chance of a yes, rather than just saying, hey, could you help me with a letter? And someone going, oh, I'd kind of like to help, but I'm not really sure what to do. And you don't want to make it, as I say, hard for someone. So that's pretty much it for me. The only conclusion I just wanted to mention, I didn't talk too much about the DeSer Global Business School, but essentially we provide British online, fully online accredited degrees. So 100% online accredited degrees by the University of Wales and the University of East London at both bachelor degrees and MBA. So I think the email for me is in the slide deck, but certainly ask iSchoolConnect if anyone wants to find out more about doing fully online British accredited degrees. We'd of course be happy to chat, and thanks so much for having us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. I see the sample LOR. I believe it's something that maybe you've written for a colleague of yours. At least I see CEO and founder at the bottom, so I just assumed that.
No, that's not actually mine. That's not my recommendation letter. That is actually a genuine letter of recommendation that someone's written for a student for one of our programs.
Got it. So I wanted to ask, what's the difference between, say, a professional LOR and academic LOR? Is there a difference in structure and format, or do they follow the same?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the structure necessarily is the same. I think, and this is maybe, that's a great question. I think this is maybe more of a point around the cultural difference. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Laurie and Christian, because we're not an American college, and maybe this isn't correct, but my kind of feel is that American colleges really look for a well-rounded individual and want to see kind of some broad achievements, that they're very community engaged, they've been involved in sports, and they're a great all-round individual. In the UK context, it's actually a lot more narrow. Really, all they are caring about is this person suitable academically to achieve and succeed in this particular program. So they don't want someone enrolling into a master's program that they don't feel will actually be able to succeed in that program. They don't want to enroll a student and have them fail. So really, they're not worried too much about, were you the captain of a sports team, or the fact that you've got, really fabulous awards for community engagement. They're great individual achievements, but you can add them in. There's no harm in adding them. But really, in a UK context, they're looking for, if I use an example of an MBA, so-and-so has worked 3 years managing teams in this context, 4 years managing teams in this context. They're a wonderful leader. They're a great people person. They understand the strategy of business together with a hard work ethic. The things that would work well in the context of doing that program is really more relevant in a British context.
Got it. I love that perspective of bringing in culture and the perspective that each culture and belief would have. Laurie, Christian, any points to add here? Would you think that it maybe differs regionally in the US even maybe?
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself again. No, I don't think there's a big difference at all. I think, when we talk about professional recommendations and an academic recommendation, the format in the United States does tend to be roughly the same. Content may differ a little bit because they're going to have different perspectives and relations with that student, but generally no difference.
Understood. Laurie, anything that you'd want to add here?
Yeah, just to add on, I completely agree with points made both by Christian and Matt. And I would say that for in the United States, what would be the most important and similar to what you would see elsewhere. But I think the source of the letter is probably the most relevant. That way, we would need to make sure that there's a strong correlation to the skills that the person is speaking towards, and making sure that there's a connection to the needs of the program and the skills and abilities of the student. So as long as we can pull all of that together and the source is credible, then I think the content, similar to what Matt and Christian were saying, is similar.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your inputs, guys. I'm just going to move on to the next slide.
All right, so now it's my pleasure to share just a little bit about the context of our school. Midland University, as I shared before, is in Fremont, Nebraska in the United States. We are a small, private, liberal arts college, and so we're a 4-year undergraduate college, and we do also offer certain graduate degrees. At this time, all of our undergraduate programs are in person. We do have a very large footprint. We're a small college. We have a large footprint covering 43 of the United States and 19 countries. And so we are really well equipped to support students through not only through the admissions process, but their journey towards earning a bachelorate and ultimately a graduate degree. We have a number of students who come to Midland University to pursue their undergraduate degree and then are able to transition to our graduate programs and help in a number of capacities through a graduate assistant type of role. So 100% of our undergraduate students that come to Midland are on scholarship. And so that's often appealing to, especially to international students, that there are funds available for our students. So I'll provide my contact information here in the chat just a little bit later, but be happy to continue that conversation with anyone who might be interested in a small college experience in Nebraska. Some of the programs we're most noted for are nursing, education, and I would also throw in there some of our health professions degrees as well. Okay. We also have a large population. I should share the profile of our student. We have a large population of our students on the undergraduate side who are participating in athletics or arts scholarships. So we have 33 varsity sports, and it's a very fun, vibrant campus community. All right, so let's talk a little bit, next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about personal statements. So we've spent the majority of our time with you today talking about letters of recommendation. And I would say one of the main difference between the letter of recommendation and the personal statement is the author. So the personal statement is written by a student, and it's a short sample of writing that just complements all of the other admissions documents that you would send in, whether that be resume or transcripts, that just helps the university understand a little bit more about who you are as a person. The personal statement will complement the other materials, but what this allows us in the admissions world to do, or whatever the purpose of the personal statement might be, which we'll get to in just a minute, it lets us understand more about the student at a very detailed level. So you can share about your experiences and your talents and your strengths through specific examples and stories. So these stories tell the audience why you'd be a good addition to the program, how your goals are matched with the offerings of the program, and how you can contribute to the campus community. So in the personal statement, there'll be a variety of different topics that you'll be writing on. There's 2 basic types. So one is a personal statement where you're given the prompt, and that could be in line with most likely in line with an admissions application, or they could just ask to have a personal statement written on your personal values. And so the content, again, is mostly in support of other documents that you would share, but really just tells a story around the skills and experiences that you would bring to the table. Next slide, please. So what is a personal statement and how is it different than a letter of recommendation? As I shared, the author is the main difference, and the personal statement is written by the student and a letter of recommendation is written by a third party. What is most important in a personal statement is for you to bring your true, authentic self and share your voice. If you are writing for a master's program, the voice will be a little bit different than if you're a high school student applying to an undergraduate program. And also, again, different if you're applying to a professional PhD type of program. Your voice is important, but you want to become present yourself and think about the way in which you're presenting yourself. And to Matt and Christian's points earlier, it's important to understand who the audience is that will be reading this letter as well, or the personal statement as well. If you're writing a personal statement for a PhD program, the content that you're going to want to include is going to be very specific to your work experiences in your graduate studies and undergraduate studies. While if you're writing a personal statement for an undergraduate program, the experiences and community involvement and things like that will be a very, very important topic for you to cover. Also with the personal statement, similar to the points that were made earlier, the shorter and more concise you can be while still making your point will really help you stand apart. A personal statement that's more than 2 pages long is going to take the reader a long time to get through, and really for the reader to be able to see who you are, clearly be able to read your writing and get to the content and the meat will really help them make the connection to your skills and if you're a good match for the program. So personal statement prompts and topics. So as I shared before, there's 2 basic content topic points, if you will. So there's a specific topic. You're going to want to make sure that you have done your research. You're going to want to make sure that the program that you're writing the personal statement for, you understand the values, the vision, and the mission of the company, organization, or school that you're writing to. And then if there's a specific prompt, sounds easy, but be sure to answer the prompt. Be sure to answer the question in a very direct and specific way using personal examples. And when I say personal examples, I mean speaking specifically to a job that you performed and reached a goal, and you explain how that relates to the goals of the program that you're applying for. Or you could talk about a certain course that you did really well in, or even share a moment of growth. You could talk about a failure and how you worked through it and worked hard and tried to and come out of that. So the second type of topic, if you will, is a very open topic where they say, write a page about yourself, right? It seems easy, but oftentimes that's the hardest thing to do, is just to sit down and write a topic about yourself. But the things that you should include in a personal statement with an open topic are specific skills, and these can be academic, personal. You can share a little bit about your career goals and how all of those are related as well. If you have taken any specific personality tests like the Gallup Strengths Finder, our university is a Gallup Strengths School. And so if you've taken things like that where you can clearly articulate any of your skills, abilities, and strengths, I would encourage you to include those, because again, this is almost like an elevator pitch, if you will. You have 1 page to really sell yourself and your strengths, and you want to be sure to maximize that opportunity. Lessons learned in an open prompt situation, sharing a lesson learned is powerful. You're going to want to, make sure that you approach this in a professional setting and share what you've learned and how you will use those lessons learned in the program that you're applying for. Again, make any connections to the program or intentions with the program, any way that you can personally connect with the mission, vision, and values of the institution or the program that you're applying for will really help you stand out against other candidates if you can clearly articulate how your personal values match those of the program. It'd also be helpful for you to share your future goals, how those may align. If you could share maybe a 5 or 10-year plan and how the program that you're applying for will set you up to reach those. So it'd be a nice moment, again, to really sell yourself and your values and what you're working towards. If there is a life moment that you would like to share on in a personal statement, a reflection would be a great, again, moment of growth for you to focus on. But I would, again, encourage you to keep a positive tone, as this is your moment to sell yourself and what you would bring to the team. Also, as you're writing this letter of recommendation, remember that the people who are reviewing your application are reviewing a number of applications. And so just a general tone of appreciation and professionalism for the review that's being done by either the admissions team or committee is very appropriate to include in that personal statement. Okay, slide. Please.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laurie. I actually had a question on this one. You mentioned there's no set format. It should be as brief as possible. You emphasizing brevity and maybe trying to keep it to 1 to 2 pages. But would there be like you mentioned, like there's so many of these coming to admissions officers. Would there be a maximum word limit maybe that sometimes they suggest, or is this something that's purely up to you?
Well, in a slide or two, I give an example of the personal statement prompt that we share for my university, and we're specific about that. And so I would say in most times I would try to keep it to 1 page in length. Should be similar to a resume, should be able to look at it and pull the points out very easily. For our university specifically, we ask only for 2 to 3 paragraphs. And so that could, I don't have a specific word count that I would recommend, but I think that if a page is appropriate or just a few paragraphs.
Understood. And what about feedback? Do we, should we, since it's a personal statement, right? I would ideally know myself best. So say I'm writing this document, who do I get it reviewed by? Who would be the right person to give me feedback on it maybe?
Great point, great question. I would say I would treat this personal statement prompt similar as you would any essay that you are submitting for review for a class or an assignment. So I would begin with, creating an outline. What are the few points that I want to make? Start there and then start in with an introductory paragraph or even an introductory line in this case, since we're space sensitive, and then really fill in the points that you want to make with those specific examples or stories to help bring your story to life. And so once you approach it as you would just any normal term paper or classroom assignment, I would think that those people are also who you would have a review assignment, but also be the appropriate folks to review your work as well. So anybody who may be in an education setting, a previous teacher or professor, somebody that you trust and know that has the qualifications for that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laurie. I'll just move ahead with the next slide.
Sounds great. Tips for a successful letter of recommendation and personal statement. Submit your documents on time, right? It seems easy and seems simple, but you want to make sure that it's on time and free of grammatical and spelling errors. If those two things are not done, unfortunately, those are little marks that are against your application from the get-go before they even are able to make it to your application documents. And so my recommendation is submit it as you would any final term paper or assignment. Read it, proof it, and submit it on time. And next, you just want to, before you submit it, you want to make sure one final time that the points that you're making in your letter connect very clearly and very well to the goals and objectives of the program that you're applying for. There have been a couple of situations when I've reviewed personal statements, and after I've read it, I'm like, did they submit the right assignment? Is this a different document that they meant to assign? And so I think the more clearly you can connect your personal and professional goals to what you're applying for, then I think the more success you'll have through this document. And again, brainstorm topics, create an outline, and submit. Okay, and so finally, thank you. Here's a sample personal statement that we ask for our students at Midland University. As you can see, it just asks for 2 to 3 paragraphs in length. This specific statement is a statement that we use for our students who are on academic probation. And so what we're trying to get out of this prompt is we're trying to understand some of the lessons learned through students who may have struggled in the past, and give grace for that, right? It's okay to be able to humbly and professionally admit that you might have come through challenges. But during this time, we want to understand how have you worked through those, how have you grown as a person, and how will you bring those lessons learned along with you into this program. And so this personal statement prompt, we want 2 to 3 paragraphs in length, and we want to just simply asking, who are you as a student? And so when you go to write a personal statement, if this was your prompt, again, I would make a few points. So it says you may choose to include topics like your academic history, any challenges you've worked to overcome, willingness to use academic support resources, etc. So what I would do is I would write 2 to 3 points, and then I would say, these are, I'm going to choose, this is my topic that I want to cover, these are the points that I want, and then begin writing. You may find that sometimes the hardest part is only keeping it to 2 to 3 paragraphs in length, but that's going to challenge you as a writer to be very specific and concrete to the examples that you're sharing. Then once you submit these along with your resume, any of their application materials, letters of recommendation will really help to show the admissions department or scholarship committee, whoever it may be, who you are as a student. So as you're writing these, I'm happy to help continue to be a resource for you and just encourage you to bring your true authentic self. And yeah, this is your moment to share your story and set yourself up for your future. So it's an exciting moment. So take advantage of that.
Awesome. Thank you all three for all the wonderful points. There's quite a few questions in the Q&A section, so I'm just gonna start going through them. Laurie, one of the points that you mentioned were grammar and punctuation, and how having issues in your grammatical, in grammar or in what you've written, having even tiny things could be a black mark on your profile for a while. There's actually two different schools of thoughts here, right? One is British English and American English. Do students get penalized for that? Considering that we do have people from Australia here as well as America, I'd love to know. Like, do you guys look into that, and is that something that you take into consideration? Are they using a different English?
Great question. Personally, from our institution, that would not be anything that we would, look at in a negative fashion. The things that I was looking for, we want to look at simple punctuation, capitalization, sentence structure, things like that are very important to come to bring to the table. But I would say, again, to emphasize my point, be your true authentic self. And, we want to just see a sample of your writing and who you are as a person. And so as long as you have the simple errors corrected and taken care of, then I think the students will be fine.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, because I'd say that that's exactly right what Laurie said. I don't think it matters for us as British institutions, whether you're writing in, say, American English or British English, because, we would understand that both of those are correct from the markets you're coming from. But going to what the comments were earlier about grammar and spelling and being accurate, what wouldn't look good is if it's a little bit of a mixture. So sometimes you use American spelling words and sometimes using British English, and then you're not consistent. So the only thing I would add is whatever you do in our context is fine, as long as it's consistent that it is one or the other.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, the big differences is maybe vocabulary and spelling. But even I find myself sending an email to a student and I go, oh, what they must think of me, because I just use a completely different vocabulary or a spelling of a word. So it happens.
Got it. Thank you for that input. So there's another question. A lot of times universities only accept LORs coming directly from the person submitting it. So a lot of students here are still in school. So they're asking, how can they get their school to submit the LOR to the university that they're applying to?
So a lot of times, I'll jump in. A lot of times you'll be asked to submit a letter, and the letter should come directly from the recommender, the referee, the writer, whoever. When it gets to a master's degrees in the United States, what you may find is that if you're applying for that master's degree, you submit your application and you submit the names and the contact information of those recommenders. Recommenders are then sent a link directly to them. The recommender clicks on the link, they're taken to a form, they complete the form, they click submit, and then that's how we get it. A lot of schools do it that way as well.
Awesome. Another question for anybody that would like to take this up. What about visiting faculty? So a lot of universities have visiting faculty, sometimes from international destinations in India. Should they, and would it be relevant to get a LOR from one of these people, because they might be there just for a short period of time?
I definitely think that a visiting faculty would be an appropriate faculty member to write a letter of recommendation, as long as they know you. If you have a relationship with the faculty member and you've either been in their class or you worked alongside them on a project or something like that, then I think it is definitely appropriate, as long as they know you in an academic setting or in the setting that would mirror the program setting that you're applying for.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would just confirm what I was saying earlier about relevance. So I don't think it matters so much if it's a permanent faculty, a visiting faculty, or not even faculty at all, someone working professionally, if it's relevant to the field. So if you're applying for a mathematics program and it's a visiting professor who's well respected in mathematics and took you for a class, or was your teaching assistant that was supporting you or whatever, and that person knows that you're, really switched on, capable, motivated, absolutely fantastic. So I think that there's no problem in that person's background, visiting or permanent, more so the relevance to your application in the field of study.
Awesome. Thank you for that. There's another question on, so basically, as you mentioned, relevance, right? So there's quite a few questions. I've worked with my professor for 5 months. So I'm assuming all of those go back to the same thing. How relevant is that, professor, as well as how well do they know you, right? How can they really take that opportunity to recommend you? There's another interesting one. Again, I think this is also answered where if, say, there's a professor from a college that you're studying at, but they've quit, and now they want to give you that LOR. So there will be a mismatch between, you know, your CV or your resume saying that I studied at this school, and then I'm getting an LOR from a professor who is now teaching at another school. So does that impact you negatively? How do you convey that, okay, there is, this professor did teach previously at the same school as me?
I think that goes back to one of the first slides that we did. First off, it will not penalize you, but you should, when the introduction for that letter comes in, saying, this is how I know the student, this is where I've taught them, this was my role, this is for how long I've known them or worked with them. That's where that comes into play, and that should not penalize you in any way.
Awesome. Is there a difference between, say, a postal statement for the US and the UK and Australia? I believe we did touch upon cultural aspects. Is there anything else that differentiates them really?
I would just confirm what I was saying earlier. The same for a letter of recommendation and a personal statement that is sometimes required, not required for all of our degrees, but certainly required for some degrees. I think there was a question actually I saw in the chat about whether these letters are actually required or recommended. Different universities will have different policies, and each program might have a different policy. So definitely make sure that you know exactly what the requirements are and whether it's mandatory or recommended. But for a personal statement, same principle as before, that for British universities, it's really more about identifying that you are a suitable candidate for that specific degree program. So any work experience, passion that you have for engineering, if you're applying for engineering, how many years you've worked as an engineer, some exciting projects maybe that you've worked on. And yes, as I say, it's not a problem to add in that maybe you were a lifeguard for 5 years and, you know, supporting your community, but it's not really going to help you that much, and it's not typically that relevant. So in the British context, I would just say, again, focus more on why you will be able to actually succeed and be a good contributor for the program. It's not just you individually being able to get into program X. You want to actually be contributing to the program as a whole, and that you bring something as a student that will make this actually beneficial to other students, because you want that cross-cultural dynamic and mix of interesting perspectives. And so, you know, think about it in that way. What are you actually bringing to this group of students who are going to be studying this program?
Got it. Guys, a few other questions. So there's the whole concept of home tutors, right? Students take support from professors that might, or even people that are experts in certain subjects, and they teach you that subject after class or after school, right? So would getting an LOR from your personal tutor be a good idea? Would that reflect badly, or would that be accepted?
That's a really good question. Generally, we prefer to have them from a school, and the reason being is for the possibility for bias. So if you're paying someone to be in your home, to be a personal tutor for you, they may feel obligated to, I think, be overly gracious with their comments.
Understood. Another one, is diversity important? So say I'm applying to a university and I get 2 LORs from the same college that I'm at, from 2 different people, but from the same college in the same STEM. Would it make more sense to maybe look at a professional LOR, say I've worked, or is it fine to still get both from the same institute?
That's a great question. I think that, yes, the diversity would definitely help to speak to the experiences that you've had as an individual, both personally and professionally, but I don't know if it necessarily is a requirement. So I think, again, going back to relevance and content would be the direction that I would coach students into, as opposed to trying to seek references from outside of the same university. If all of your experience is at one place and it's relevant, and you know that you have deep connections there and they're supportive of your future goals, then I think that I would coach students to seek the truest connections before seeking letters of recommendation from different schools or different institutions.
Got it. One final question for all three of you. So say a student wants to apply to multiple institutes, and they each have the whole self-submitted process required, right? Where the recommender goes ahead and sends out the recommendations themselves. Would that person be required to say, have the recommender fill out that same thing 12 times? Or is there a process that makes that easier on the recommender?
I think it would go back to the structure of the letter of recommendation. If it was a graduate program or a program that was similar to the structure that Christian shared before, there would need to be separate submissions for each of the schools, and each school would definitely have their own process. If there's a letter, I think I would just want to make sure that the letter wasn't very specific, that said, I recommend the student for this program at this school. And then to use that multiple times, that would not necessarily look good for the student. But right. I think that if there was a general letter of recommendation, you could do that. But I still think that I would coach the students into seeking specific letters of recommendation for the specific program that you're looking to.
Got it.
Also, on the personal statement side of things, I would encourage a student to, just like you would a cover letter or a resume when you're submitting a job application, possibly start with the same core, and if you're wanting to share the same traits and same values because they're important to you in a personal statement, or the same examples, same professional experiences, you could start with the same core or the same points that you want to make. But I would encourage a student to alter their personal statement to the specific needs of each program.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would.
Oh, please go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, for a personal statement, absolutely, it's yourself, and you should really be personalizing about the specific school and the specific program. When you're asking, though, for a letter of recommendation, I think it's slightly different because, to ask someone to write you 6 letters of recommendation versions, I think, people maybe won't be so open to doing that. So I think the question then is, are you applying to 6 schools for the same program, or are you actually not sure what program you want to do and applying for a few different programs? The reason that's relevant is if you know you want to do a master's in finance, but you're maybe going to apply to 3 or 4 different schools, I think you can be really specific in the letter of recommendation to say, so-and-so would be a fabulous contribution to undertake a master's of finance because of blah, 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 and just don't put the name of the school. And I think that's fine. But if you are on one hand thinking, I want to do an MBA or a Master's of Finance, you can't have one generic, I don't think, letter of recommendation. So that's how I would tackle that. And that's if you can gather the letter of recommendation and submit them yourselves. But as Christian mentioned, some people will be applying to institutions where the institution will send you a direct link. So that individual will have to then fill out a form for each individual college. But ideally, again, goes back to one of my earlier comments that the easier you can make it for someone, the better. If you ask a professor for a little favor of 1 letter of recommendation, they're going to be pretty comfortable and usually pretty helpful. If you went to anyone and said, could you write me 11 letters of recommendation? I think the answer would be, well, okay, I'm not sure. That's like, I've got a few other priorities.
Absolutely. Christian, I think you were also about to say something when I cut you off. Anything you'd like to add there?
No, I would just say there are some third-party applications where you can submit 1 recommendation or 1 essay for 1 school. So an example of that for undergraduate students or bachelor's seeking would be the Common application. Some master level programs here in the United States will have third-party applications. So for example, trying to pull it off the top of my head, for physician assistant, they ask people to apply through an organization called CASPA, so are some times when one letter would suffice.
Got it. Thank you so much, guys. I'd like to take this time to thank each and every one of you. Matt from the OCA Global School, Christian from York University of Pennsylvania, and Laurie from Midland University. It's a pleasure having all of you here. And these insights were really grateful. I'd like to quickly tell the audience about a guide to get a stellar letter of recommendation, right? There's a feedback form that you can fill out, which will be in the chat right now, which is at bit.ly/isc_fest_feedback_day_2. And that's about it. So it was a pleasure having you guys here again. Thank you once again for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Anytime. That being said, guys, there is a whole other day left. Make sure you stay tuned tomorrow from 5 onwards for 4 other sessions on various aspects of studying abroad, things that we haven't covered yet with new speakers and new content. So make sure you stay tuned, make sure you join us, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.